I think that the reason that Bitcoin is going to win is because of the community.
Secretary, temporary portability of the dollar or other assets. Let me raise the bugaboo of what is called inflation.
This argument that prices are going up about 2% believes it.
In space, the most powerful miners, billionaires, have tried to change and co-opt and alter Bitcoin to shape it to their liking. And without these incredibly hardcore sort of high priests of the Bitcoin, it would have been hopelessly malleated in all number of ways. And so there is a reason why someone would be incredibly protective of Bitcoin.
We don't take shit from anybody. We don't have to listen to what people kind of want to push for Bitcoin, because people think that they can come into the space, these big influencers, and they think that they can change Bitcoin and try to fix it and make it better. But we all know that Bitcoin fixes you. You don't fix Bitcoin.
Some people see toxic maximalism as like a bunch of mean people who are bad for Bitcoin, but in reality, it's the complete opposite. It's really good. I see toxic maximalism as like Bitcoiners from all over the globe, from all different walks of life, really coming together for one goal, and that's hyper Bitcoinization at all costs. So nothing else matters. Fuck your feelings. No one cares if you don't like Bitcoin. We're going to the moon and we're ushering in hyper Bitcoinization.
I won't stop until every single shitcoin channel is defeated, because they are poison, and that's my mission.
Because, you know, if there is an escape, that escape will be used.
Welcome to Toxic Airwaves. We gotta turn that up a little bit. I'm stoked for tonight's episode.
Should be a good time.
Yeah, I just came back from a conference in Omaha, Nebraska, and that was quite a bit of a blast. There was a large amount of shitcoining, but the Bitcoiners there were solid, and the keynote speakers, my good friend Stephen Cole, and he just dismantled all of the shit coins in his presentation, and it was absolutely fantastic. But yeah, how you doing tonight, Skeef?
Doing pretty good. I heard about that. It sounded like a good time in Omaha.
Yeah, I think the talk was recorded, so hopefully it'll be somewhere. But it was so funny because there's this DeFi protocol group of devs, like 7 guys, and they were all sitting front row for it, and I think they might have gotten a little bit butthurt. But they were like working on some algorithmically pegged stablecoin, so something that's so incredibly complicated and probably unnecessary at this point.
Yeah, it's gonna. I mean, if you actually want to learn about this, talk to Ben the Car Man. But the DLCs, distributed log contracts, I'm super excited about what that looks like for stable coins. Like basically, the ones that I've looked at, people can come up with structures where one person wants to be long and one person wants to be short, or a bunch of people on both sides, and then people buying different sides of the DLC is my understanding. So it can create something of a stable coin and be pretty interesting. Or maybe it won't work. Who knows?
Interesting. I thought DLCs were just expansion packs that you bought for video games. But yeah, I'm stoked. We got a lively chat. We got our usuals in here.
Got the old faithful.
Lurk and Don have been here from day one, and we got Gazala in the spaces tonight.
Oh, nice.
Let me see if I can invite her to speak.
What was the strain of flour tonight, Skeef? Lurk is asking. Nothing currently, but we got some Gorilla Glue teed up for once I get home.
Nice. I use
pretty strong indica.
I'm using Gorilla Glue it's the brand of the wood glue I'm using for my chicken coop. So
nice.
We're on different pages on that, but to each their own. But yeah, it sounds like Parking Lot Con was a success for the most part. some people got sick.
I would estimate I shared joints with 40 or 50 people in Dallas and didn't get so much as a sniffle afterwards. So I don't know. I tried to be careful about sharing that information because I didn't, if somebody was actually really sick, I don't want them to feel bad about it. But it is pretty hilarious.
Yeah, it is pretty funny. I mean, that thing, it just like blew my mind that pot's still illegal in Texas. And there was a line in The Most Dangerous Superstition where Larkin Rose talks about the indignation that people have when they try so hard to be law-abiding citizens, and then the government turns around and doesn't serve them. And I think a lot of people are waking up to that right now, especially with Chairman Biden's recent decisions. Oh, you're genetically immune to COVID?
I had it in May. Well, I'm like 99% sure I had it. Lost taste, smell, the whole thing. And then I went to a party on a Saturday, and like 80% of the people there tested positive for it a few days later. So pretty decent chance it was the Rona.
Yeah.
But I had it for 3 days before I realized that's what it was. And that was back when I was doing like contract work, all kinds of stuff. So there was just no mechanism to ever take any time off. So I'm like, oh, I guess I'm not taking any sick time. So actually, I don't know, it's kind of silly, but worked a lot that week.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point. So with, the vax mandates, if they're not going to work, I think first and foremost, we need to harp on the idea that this is going to fall apart. And if you have a little bit of awareness as to what's happening in these organizations, people are to the point where they can't function with small companies, big companies, government. So it's around to be kind of a funny thing where actually these mandates and these policies getting government. But that being said, most people, or a lot of people, maybe not most, I don't know what the percentage is. Most of the people I know that got the vax had some pretty serious side effects. And to imagine, having that every year and having to take time off, and if you don't have the PTO for it, is pretty crazy. And then if they implement the booster shots, a lot of people are really upset about this. And it's not just your right-wing people or libertarians or Bitcoiners that are upset about it. Some people that have just been totally unplugged from what's going on right now are getting upset too, which is kind of interesting.
And some people are starting to wake up. I mean, it's like one of the things I'd kind of thrown out there is kind of this idea of, basically why are we so confident Bitcoin's going to succeed in the face of, the opposition is literally the people that took out a sitting U.S. president in the 60s and then did 9/11 and then, have manufactured this whole COVID thing and, spread it all around the globe. Like, these are extremely powerful people. And so that's something I think about a lot. I think it's a super interesting question, is just why are we so confident that, that Bitcoin's going to succeed when that's the opposition is a lot of the same people that so far have been able to fend off every single significant threat to their power, which I think is I don't know. I think it's an interesting thing to think. We've all have our own answers, but I definitely think it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, not only that, they did Oklahoma City
Yes.
and allowed Pearl Harbor to happen intentionally. You can just go down the list of thing after thing that these maniacs have allowed for to consolidate power. But yeah, evil people are going to exist even after Bitcoin. And I think this is the importance of localism and the importance of turning the responsibility into, more of a local level, because, we can't control everything. We just don't have the power to get out there and worry about everybody else's business. We only ultimately do control ourselves, families, and have some influence in local communities for the most part. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think that's a super important realization, that these people only have the power over you that you give them to a large extent. It's like, we've talked about public schools, all that kind of stuff. Like it's all about, I think, opting out of the systems that they've built and because it's like that's the power relationship that the federal government has over the states. Is they say, well, we've got all this federal funding. If you want federal money for this, this, and this, then you have to do X, Y, and Z. And I think when things really start to get interesting is when the first state steps up and finally says, you know what, keep your money. I don't want it. I don't want your money. I don't want, I'll build my own highways. Who gives a shit? We just want to be done with this. No, we're not. Like, basically take away those strings that they use to make the little puppet dance. And they'll just be like, no, I'm good. And then that'll happen at a more local level, I think, as things go along. But that's something that are largely empowered to do. Opt out. I'm not going to put school. You don't have that power. Going to just all these different things that we can opt out of, and I think it's incredibly empowering. And then it's super, super exciting how many people woke up in 2020. I think a lot more people are waking up with the vaccine stuff, like even people that got it, and then they're like, what the fuck, you told me it was going to go back to normal, and now I'm supposed to get a booster every 6 months, or like, okay, or even if you support it, you're like, but like, some guy now can't feed his family because he doesn't want to do this experimental medical thing. That's there's just a lot of people that I think are waking up, and I think it's super, super, super cool to see. I wish it was more, but it's a lot more than I think a lot of people give credit.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. So Don asks, I have to read the chat because Ski forgot his glasses, but Don asked, does that happen before the U.S. collapses? I don't know. I mean, if you go into like the financials of each individual state, it's pretty bad. The unfunded pensions, all of these liabilities that these different states. There's like 3 states in the entire country that are positive, and I think it's I know that Wyoming is one of them. I should know this off the top of my head, but I'd like to say it's like Tennessee, Wyoming, South Dakota, maybe Alaska too, so maybe 4. And there's very few states that have that power to stick up the middle finger and tell the federal government to go away and we don't want your money anymore. And that's why, we see so much nonsense happening right now, because the Federal Reserve or the federal government has access to a printing press that they can just, give to the local state ultimately. And I think it's kind of accelerating right now, but as we're watching, there being a bunch of conflict between the states and the federal government, I think that is going to be seen as a security issue for a lot of states, and so they're going to have to start acting, appropriately. And to Bitcoin, it's like states realize that they can mine and they can generate a ton of wealth to be sovereign from. They're going to do it, and it's but yeah, we're pretty close to defaulting on debt, and that'll be interesting. I think it's interesting to watch for me personally what's happened in Venezuela, because you would think that with the situation, the government wouldn't be able to kind of hold control over its people, and they've somehow still kind of, so you could see US collapse and still be seeing this, but who knows how it plays out. You got any thoughts?
Just to AK, I had my prescription sunglasses, but I'm not trying to look like a cop for the whole episode, so that's how I could drive without glasses. Otherwise, I would have crashed for sure because I'm blind as hell. But yeah, no, I go back and forth. Like, I could see a failed treasury auction being like a really, really big point where things really flip, but I could also see a really slow unwinding over years. I mean, like kind of more of a Soviet Union type unwinding, just because it was like, at least from what I've read, I'm sure there's people that know a lot more, but it's like, from what I've read, it seems like there was a very long period of time, like decades and decades and decades, when, the Soviet Union was the number 2 power. It's the most amazing thing ever. They control everything, blah, 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 blah. And then one day you could take a sledgehammer to the Berlin Wall. And that was pretty common, I think, view from the outside. But the reality is it had been crumbling the whole time. It's like this whole, I don't know, it's like this whole idea, like the beginning of Atlas Shrugged. They have the giant oak tree. It's this amazing, big, strong, giant oak tree, and then I forget how exactly. I haven't read that book in forever, but it just falls over one day. And then when it falls over, they realize it's rotted out to the core. It's totally hollowed out, and it was, this whole, perception that it gave off of being all powerful and this really strong thing. Once it falls over, you're like, oh shit, the whole thing was rotted to the core. There's nothing there. Of course it fell over. And my guess is it'll be something kind of similar to that with the U.S. that I think has already started. Like, I think we've been in a currency crisis for at least 5-7 years now, long before COVID. Yeah. And that's like one thing that frustrates me kind of sometimes with Bitcoin people is, because I have no expectations of people that aren't in Bitcoin. Like, I try to think about them as little as possible. But like when I meet Bitcoin people who are like, oh my gosh, this is happening and vaccine passports and blah, blah, blah. It's like, the world's gone crazy in the last 18 months. And it's like, no, these have been slow, methodical developments since, at least the 70s, probably a lot earlier than that. Yeah. And that I just don't think we've learned anything fundamentally new in at least 15 years. I think it's just been more of the same since then. Like, I don't think Trump was any kind of an exception to this whole trend. I think he was just a slightly more interesting version of what they were doing anyway. And yeah, I don't know. If I had to bet money, I would bet on a really slow collapse, and that people will just one day realize, oh, the IRS doesn't matter anymore, does it? That's interesting. Like, I don't see a big kind of crack up boom, or like the people that think there's going to be a hot civil war. That seems not 0%, but extremely close.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to get, and I think that like slow collapse, we're on our way into it, and it's not like it starts today or tomorrow type thing, but it started, in 2008 or even prior. And, you see that with all of the fighting and lawlessness happening around the country. Oh boy. AK-47 says, I listened to Anatomy of the State, read by Guy Swan, and my biggest takeaway was government is not something tangible and is only something that is a social construct in the mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
You would like the book Alex was mentioning, Most Dangerous Superstition, for sure.
That's awesome.
Similar idea behind it.
Yeah, no, that's really good.
Yeah. Throw a couple stats at Guy Swan while we're on the subject. That guy puts out a ridiculous amount of stuff for absolutely free. Yeah.
I love the Sphinx tribe, and I always try and throw sats. Pretty much all the sats that come to me in Sphinx go to Guy. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think we're well into the collapse, and people need to be treating it as such. And it's more apparent if you're living in Portland, and less apparent if you're living in Tucson. But this is something I was talking with Alex Svetsky on my podcast about, is just a lot of people that are doing okay financially right now and benefit from the system, especially like, your typical rich liberal, is so disconnected from reality and what normal people are experiencing right now. And if you just take a second to look at what's happening in these cities, to your average people, to your low-income workers over the past, even prior to COVID, it was totally wacky and awful. And I think the system really breaks when those people that have been, benefiting from the system now are struggling to eat and struggling to charge their Teslas or, fill their hot tubs with water, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I mean, they're already taking the gaming computers.
Yeah. There's going to be no more, I don't know. I was going to try to think of a video game, but can't even. I'm so incompetent with video games. I don't even know the names.
Mario.
Call of Duty. That's a video game. I don't know if that's on.
I used to play that one
gaming
way too
computers
much.
Or not.
Oh yeah, everything's on gaming computers.
Okay.
Okay. Guys, do you have anything for us tonight?
I got nothing.
You got your tinfoil hat.
I'm just waiting for the recall stuff. Honestly, I don't feel like it's going to happen in California. So
Yeah, that's
I
been
just
pretty
I want to
wild.
rip off that Band-Aid. Yeah.
Does it look like that Larry Elder guy has a decent shot?
I
Sure.
just think he has huge money in this. He brought in, and he's Obama and all these people, fighting for him. So,
She's talking about Newsom.
I imagine
yeah.
he has the same vote too. That probably helps.
Yeah, Obama wouldn't be fighting for what the media calls a black-white supremacist.
Shout out to Dave Chappelle.
Yeah. Yeah, that one's get interesting, and I think ultimately is going to happen with the recall election is a lot of people are going to go away feeling very disenfranchised and feeling like it was not done correctly. And we've already seen the stories come out of funky things going on with recall ballots of going in today to vote and not being turned away, saying that they already voted. People out of state getting ballots, people getting arrested with hundreds of ballots in their car. So it feels really, really empowering and invigorating to look at politics and say, that doesn't have to affect me in my life today. And I'm separating myself as much as possible, regardless of the outcome.
And in the short term, there's so much that a corrupt, evil person like Newsom can do. But in the long term, I think this eroding of trust in the system, this just giant increase in, I don't know what the word is, like division and, a bunch of people being angry, all of that I think is extremely positive long term, because it wakes us up to this idea that it's completely and utterly ridiculous that there's such thing as a federal government, let alone, and a state government. The idea that these things even exist is completely illogical and irrational and has no grounding in reality. And I think the more people distrust those, I don't know if institutions is the right word or whatever, the better. And once, the more people realize, they really don't give a shit. They really, really to their core do not give it. They care about nothing that I value, nothing that I find important. And, what am I doing? Why am I participating in this? As more people have that, a lot of people in Bitcoin had that realization 5 years ago or whatever. And, I don't know, I'm excited to see a lot more people kind of have that idea. Do you want to do?
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And to be honest, this is the first time in my life I've registered to vote. I kind of did it to make my family members happy because we all really hate his guts. But also, the guy that's really competing against him is very anti-mandate, anti-vax mandate, anti-mask mandate. So I was like, if I'm ever going to vote, I'll do it to get this slime out of here. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it does bring people together for the right reasons. So I do see that. That'll be positive. I just still hate him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it'd be like to live under Gavin Newsom. He's a bad master.
Yeah.
We have Doug Ducey. He's a little bit better of a master.
Yeah. And it's a lot of people also, I think, haven't realized how close these people are to Stalinists. That it's, a traditional Stalinist is a lot more of a, I think, a lot more appropriate comparison than, I don't know, pick your favorite president in the past. And that, that the main thing standing in the way of them accomplishing a lot of things that Stalin accomplished is just access to power. And that's kind of the question we sort of opened with. It's a big part of my answer to that question, which is why are we still so optimistic about Bitcoin when these people have beat back every single threat that there has ever been to their power? And it's the core of my answer to that is that it just absolutely obliterates their ability to accumulate power and resources. And, it takes a lot longer than a lot of us would like, but it does, and it is, and it's just barely getting started. And so it's they accumulate power and resources through taxes and inflation, and it eliminates inflation, and it makes taxes very, very, very difficult over a long enough time period.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really good. I think that's why it's appropriate to call these people chairmen and to use similar titles as the Stalinist had. Politburo could be, I don't know what the Politburo would be.
Yeah.
All their lobbyists and media and pharma companies, maybe. It's just a little bit different of a system. But, yeah, it kind of Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to see what you guys thought about the, Walmart Litecoin.
Oh, I saw a little bit about that. It was like a fake article and then got retracted or something.
I think it'd be
I think some people bought it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know it looked. I just saw the aftermath. I didn't see it when it was going in real time, but it looked pretty funny.
Yeah, that one. They've been on a tear. It's so funny. Like when you look at the way that kind of social psychology works and how people jump on things, and you look at what the media is doing, and it's like, oh, they can print fake news, so we can too. And people just fall for it because they're so conditioned to just believe in the headlines. But yeah, Litecoin's a shitcoin. Does Sailor have BlackRock over his shoulder telling him when to buy from Young Lurk?
I could see that. Yeah, I don't know. I think we've talked about him before, but I never had any expectations that he would be some kind of crypto anarchist model or anything like that. But my red flags really went up when he did that TFTC with Marty and I think Austin is the guy's name from GAM, and just the totally and completely disingenuous arguments that he was making and like the approach he was taking, and that was super concerning to me. That still seems extremely unlikely that he was like some kind of Fed from the beginning, but it does definitely seem like they're really, really tightening the screws on him. And that guy has, regulators and auditors permanently, up his ass at all times. And so there's a lot that they can do to get him to shut the fuck up or to toe the party line.
Yeah. Marty's definitely not paranoid. That was pretty eye-opening, and I totally agree with the red flags that went up for me. I was listening to that interview and just couldn't believe the stuff that Sailor was saying. But I mean, this is a time that's going to be really, really interesting. I think it's almost more of a liability to be one of these people working at a large-scale company than it is really an asset, and to rely on people like that, because the way our structure works in the United States, they have the ability to put these people in prison. And we saw what happened to Jack Ma. If you go, say, for example, Sailor, is very open about what Bitcoin is, that this is a big FU to the establishment, to the parasites. It's going to lead to the elimination of the state and the Federal Reserve, and that, he's going to wield it. I'm getting a call. He's going to wield it. I usually put this on airplane mode. Gosh darn it. He's going to wield it as a weapon, to combat these maniacs. And, if he were going to do that, he would get Jack Ma really quick. And, to whatever degree, BlackRock has so much power. It's unbelievable. Like, they were one of the first people to jump on the ESG movement back in, I think it was like 2004. It was a long time ago. The UN brought it forward a couple of years prior. And that's a tool that's wielded to control. It's a tool that I believe is inherently anti-human. I think it was Lurk or somebody mentioned that California is, limiting Tesla chargers. And, that's ultimately what's going to happen, with a lot of these green policies, is they're going to limit your ability and access to power, which is going to create, some massive issues for, average people and create poverty. And you start implementing things like that in developing countries, and it's just game over for them. They're just going to be starving and in famine. It's going to be awful.
And a really extremely successful PR move that they were able to pull off was convincing people that these corporate elites, billionaires, people, Larry Fink at BlackRock, all these kind of people, that these people want free markets, or that they want competition, or that they want less regulation, or that they're not, basically modern day Bolsheviks. And that was that was fascinating to watch happen, because it's just an absolute pile of nonsense. And like, what these people want is totalitarian states that they think they can have control over. Like they want, that's why a lot of this is being designed to be served up to, basically to serve the world order up to China and to the CCP, because they want to see government move in the direction of the CCP and away from, what America used to be. And, I think a lot of these politicians are in on it and paid off. And, something as simple as leaving $85 billion worth of stuff in Afghanistan. I mean, Max Kaiser had an epic tweet. He said 9/11 cost $500,000, and then 20 years later, they got $65 billion worth of stuff. And he had calculated the rate of return on that, 100-something thousand % or whatever it was. And he's like, the only thing that beats those returns is Bitcoin.
Yeah, that was awesome.
But it's, and that's, Afghanistan, all the rare earth minerals, all that they have. I mean, it wasn't, 24 hours after everything fell apart that the Taliban and the CCP were having meetings. I mean, none of this stuff is coincidence. Like these people are very, very, very good at this stuff, and they know what they're doing. And, I think the CCP is going to fall apart for a whole bunch of other reasons, but it's definitely interesting to watch and try to see how this stuff plays out.
Yeah. Should place bets on when the Three Gorges Dam is going to collapse.
Yeah.
But I think like when we're looking at the Great Reset, and what these people are doing, ultimately what they're trying to do is they're just trying to protect the privilege that they've had for, 50 years since 1971. But also, they pretty much just get to sit on their asses and rake in money by doing absolutely nothing, just by being in a position of privilege and location, being closer to the regulator and the printing press. And they're watching that they're going to lose that, because ultimately, unless they're somehow able to miraculously do something similar in the future where they have the same amount of power, people are going to completely reject the premise of centralized economies, and they're going to create their own localized currencies, or they're going to turn to Bitcoin. Ultimately, there's going to be a massive rejection of this bullshit. And that's why they're looking to seek so much control and have so much power over people, because they're trying to stop that fracturing from happening and stop people from being empowered. Empowered people are very, very dangerous to a system like this. People that say, oh, no, I don't really want to take part in, being constantly monitored, and I don't want to take part in being potentially censored all the time, and I don't want to be programmed to spend money this way, or to be limited to the speech I can have online. Like if they don't do these things, they're not going to be able to accomplish their goal, because they've just robbed us blind, and people are seeing this. Inflation's a meme right now. People know they're getting completely fucked, and it's just so apparent. And you just look at literally everything. Like Biden comes out, passes these vax mandates, and his White House employees are not mandated. You look at the people that aren't mandated, it's like the Pfizer employees, a lot of these different parasitic elite circles that, have these special privileges. And, Goslow was talking about Gavin Newsom earlier. Like, that guy's a complete, he's like the perfect example of somebody who doesn't follow his own rules. And like everybody's seeing this, and they're so incredibly tired of it. And unless they can put us all in cages, digital cages, they're going to fail.
And I think what's super optimistic too is that we only need maybe 3 to 5% of the population to wake up. Like historically, historically, even before we had all of these massive technological advances that come with the internet and everything else, but historically that was plenty of people to fundamentally change the direction that a country is going. 3 to, it's more than enough. Sometimes it was a lot less than that. And so, like it's a lot of the doom and gloom pessimism I see is they say, half the country this, 75% this. Yeah. No, they're always going to be completely just retarded. 75% easy, probably 85, maybe 90. And that's totally fine. It is what it is. Like these are not bad people. They just kind of are what they are. And, the people that are empowered with Bitcoin can construct the lives that they want to and can say, no, I'm not, I'm going to construct the life that I want to on my terms, and they say, oh, we're going to take your savings. You're going to find a way to steal from, geographically distributed multi-sig. Good luck. Oh, we're going to take your income. You're going to shut down miners you don't even know exists, or the locate, like, good luck. Oh, we're going to do this. We're going to do that. And it's just like, the more that we're empowered as individuals, the more that's a cute little observation. These, they make these threats that in the fiat world are absolutely fatal. And in the Bitcoin world, it's like, oh, you don't understand how this works. That's interesting. It's kind of cute. And I don't know, that I think is super optimistic.
There's not a single reason to feel pessimistic right now because we have the most powerful tool, in Bitcoin that we could ever have, ultimately. And, also we have a large portion of the population that's not going along with their charade, and that's happening globally. And there's just so many people, with different value sets and different goals that they cannot corral us. And, it's failing. And sure, things might get bad in the short term, and, we'll have to be resilient, not be able to enjoy the same luxury and stability that we've had in the past. But, we're going to win this, and we're already winning this. These people are so moronic and dysfunctional and arrogant to believe they can go through and push through these policies, and they're failing. They're failing. I mean, they can't even get a narrative together, and that they're trying to these brains. The people that are total are a small population of. What's happening right now is they pull way too far fast. People are, and saying, no, I'm not going to go along with it. And the majority of the population, the masses, are looking at that and saying, oh, wow, I can say no. These are people that are not willing to be courageous and not willing to go across, go and actually do anything of substance and push back on their own. Now that other people are doing it, it started to grow as a movement.
And I think even more exciting, the reason they did that, I think you phrased it too fast, too soon, 100% agree with. The reason that they did that, had to. Mm-hmm. They knew this is the last shot we got. This is not 2001. We were near of control that we had in 2001, just like anywhere near the control that we had in the mid-70s when and early. I mean, they can see their relevance trending to zero. They can see their power. They can watch it literally evaporate, and they're like, "This is our last." I really think that this is. I don't know. Like I don't want to be too naive or whatever, but I do think this is potentially the last big battle with the state, and it could take a while. It could be multiple years, but like this whole COVID, I think obviously has nothing to do with COVID in reality, but what's kind of happening under the umbrella of COVID, I think is their kind of their last grasp, and they're like this is our shot to move the world towards CCP, social credit score, which is what BlackRock wants, which is what all these big corporations want. They do not want free, empowered individuals. They want slaves that they can control. And because I don't know. I think it's just super optimistic, like exactly why they had to take this approach, because they just realized it was now or never. And yeah, the Bitcoiners can hopefully see that, we're just watching from the outside. We have time on our side. If this takes 3 years, that's fine. If this takes 10 years, that's fine. Obviously sooner rather than later, but
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important to get on the ground and be talking with, real people in a situation like this, because what the reality that's being constructed for us in the media apparatus now, the media to some degree is pretty irrelevant in the sense that nobody watches it anymore, and you're watching these things kind of, the viewership is going down. Like MSNBC is really hurting, CNN's really hurting, pretty much everybody except Fox News, because they're somewhat of the contrarian right now, are hurting pretty bad. But they're still directing the conversation to a certain extent. We just watched like this whole Joe Rogan ivermectin thing happen, and that was, a large part of the week's conversation, or last week's conversation, that everybody's wrapped up with. And so these maniacs still have some power, but I totally got lost in a tangent. I have no idea what my point was.
My favorite thing on that was the 2015 Nobel Prize speech got yanked from YouTube because the 2015 Nobel Prize in Medicine was for ivermectin. And the guy in the speech, he talks about like how important this medicine is, how widely it's used, how safe it is, how it's been used for all this different stuff. And, we've got all this massive data that it's extremely safe to use, but it got yanked from YouTube, whatever, something to the effect of, counter, anti-science narrative, or however they're phrasing it these days. But it's just like, a lot of people get real upset by stuff like that. And I just want to slap them and say, do you have any idea like how weak these people are? Like how optimistic this is, how exciting it is. Like we're literally watching the cathedral burn in front of our eyes. And, it's like these people's ability to, to control the world and to accumulate resources and accumulate power is rapidly trending to zero. And it's like there's still plenty of terrible stuff they can do in the short term, which is exactly what, we're seeing from Gavin Newsom in California and things like that. But man, the 7-year timeline, the 10-year timeline, I think is extremely exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, we need to be having a sense of humor about it. This is really funny. Did you ever see the Shia LaBeouf, He Will Not Divide Us thing? So if you ever get a chance, there's this guy on YouTube called The Internet Historian, and he's absolutely hilarious. But he kind of outlines this saga where Shia LaBeouf, after Donald Trump was elected in 2016, staged a protest in New York City in this like little square, and would show up and had a live stream going, and would just, people would just chant and cry, he will not divide us, and protest Trump. And, there a bunch of 4chan trolls showed up and, really upset them. And that's what we're watching with the elites right now. They're the elite parasites. We can't call them elites by themselves. Like, we need to frame that a little bit better. But we're watching them just have a total meltdown, and it's so incredibly funny. And I had some tyrannical teachers in public school, some really, really, really bad ones. I had this one in 7th grade. She taught a class called Common Good, and she tried to, do these things like separate the good kids from the bad kids, and really punish us. I was obviously one of the bad kids. And she would like do things.
Congratulations.
Yeah, well,
it's a compliment.
and it was just so fun because she was an awful person. She treated us like shit, and we didn't deserve to be treated that way. And that's just kind of what, public school creates. And I think it's kind of a destructive system in the first point, but it felt so good to just defy her and to tell her. Now, I totally believe in being respectful to people, but, when authority is abusive, there's no place for, just being blindly respecting and say, okay, I'm just going to go over and let you abuse me. A complete meltdown because she was. There was 15, or maybe even less, maybe 7 of us on compliance, so that was a quarter. We took over a complete meltdown. It was fun, and we weren't like that. Treated with respect. It kind of balances the power a bit, and I think that's important.
Yeah, and that blatant disrespect and mockery, fantastic way to respond to these people. And it's, my just general life approach is I default to being extremely respectful. If I'm at a restaurant, it's yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, that kind of stuff. But because my initial, on first interaction with somebody, I'm extremely polite and respectful and, kind, the whole thing. But because of that, I also go straight to scorched earth if somebody gives me a reason to regret that. And so that's, my general approach is like to assume good intent, assume, that somebody's good, because most people are, until given evidence to the contrary. But then once you get evidence to the contrary, you don't just sweep it under the rug. You go straight to just absolutely blatant disrespect and mockery, I think is the best approach. But I don't know, a fun little, if you're ever find yourself the misfortune of like having a conversation with NPCs, there's just like people that just don't have a mind. They're just, I don't know, there's all kinds of fun stuff. Like this guy, or I think I might have picked this up from Michael Malice, but it's like this idea of, if somebody, tells somebody you don't vote or whatever, and they start criticizing you, you can say, oh, don't worry, I'm one of those uninformed voters that the TV warned you about, so we're good. Just like little stuff to make it abundantly clear. You're completely irrelevant. I don't care what you think. You can say whatever you want, and I might listen if I find it entertaining, but if not, I'm going to go, and I don't know. I think all that kind of stuff is just pretty worthwhile.
That's funny. Yeah, plain stupid really pisses these people off, and it's incredibly entertaining to do that. But yeah, I think ultimately, like where we're at, we have to pick our battles too. Going out there and just, like if you go and you punch a cop in the face, that's probably a terrible idea, or if you go and make fun of a cop to their face, they're probably going to get violent with you. And that's a bad idea too. And so I think like picking and choosing these things, is important. This is why, meme culture is hilarious. And I think the meme culture is a big part of why they're looking to clamp down on the internet, and they want us to KYC, for social media platforms in the future, is because they're so butthurt about it.
Yeah.
You remember that meme in 2016 when that guy posted Donald Trump like beating the shit out of the guy in the W.
Oh yeah.
And they had CNN on it.
And they like had to make sure everybody knew that wasn't literal footage.
Yeah. Well, they went after the guy and they threatened to dox him if he didn't take it down.
Yeah. And it's like just the hackiest video editing job ever. And they're like, this was clearly manufactured. Yeah, no shit. Like, you must be fun to hang out with.
Yeah. So shout out to the NIMS posting some dank memes, making fun of this stuff. I mean, yeah, it's so good. I mean, it just their complete idiocracy is so easy to make fun of and dismantle, and I think it's important to do. But yeah, I titled this KYC is the illicit activity because I was at this conference in Omaha, and a new friend of mine from the Kansas City meetup group was there. Shout out to those guys. They got something cool going in Kansas City. And he was wearing a BIS shirt that said KYC was the illicit activity. And the Fed, who is from the cybercrime task force, or I don't know what they call it, cybercrime division, tracking down scammers in Nigeria and India, got a little bit butthurt by it and decided to approach us. And then we kind of took him for a ride, telling him how much of an idiot he is. But yeah, essentially his take on it was KYC is important because there's stupid people that the government needs to protect. So he's got a little bit of superiority complex there and self-righteousness because of his fiat authority.
Did you tell him his pension's going to be worthless?
I should have. I told him that he's going to lose, that we're ultimately going to win, and that
it's already done.
Yeah.
We're just waiting for the scoreboard to catch up.
Yeah. I mean,
shout out to AK's neighbor, whoever you are.
Yeah. It's always good to have the neighbors dropping in for the stream. Yeah. So the price is down a little bit today, but we all know where it's going.
Oh yeah, I like that's their topic.
So yeah, how do we prepare for being super rich?
So that was something we were chatting about a little bit earlier today. Just kind of this idea of like what is it, like basically what does it look like to like really mentally prepare for what things are going to look like, because it is going to be a completely different world. Like my rough approximation, just pulling numbers out of my ass, is that we see 500K to $1 million in the next couple of years. I think is pretty realistic, and then 5-10 million sometime this decade. And that's all in what it bought before COVID. So the nominal numbers could be totally insane because who knows, what the hell they're going to do with printing money and everything. And I love having this conversation with Bitcoin. It's like I talked to a lot of people about it in Dallas and things like that, because it's like, we really, really need to realize that statistically the number of people who build a generational fortune is zero. It just doesn't happen. Like the times that it does happen is insane. Like the amount of work and preparation and like daily good decisions across 70 years or 80 years is what it takes to, to maintain that kind of generational focus and to succeed in, in building that. And I hope I'm wrong, but I think a lot of people in Bitcoin are completely unprepared for that. Like there's just a lot of people who, say, oh, we're 10x from, last March, we went from 5K to 50 or, whatever it is. And, I did fine with that. It'll be fine. Good to go. And it's like, no, like 5 to 50, is completely different from 50 to 500, which is completely different from 500 to 5 million. And I think like really thinking through, like, what does it look like to realize I, could do absolutely anything I want, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whatever the number is, 2 years from now, who knows? Like to realize I could do absolutely anything I want. I could buy anything I want. I could do anything I want. But to like approach that in a way of like, of maintaining that multi-generational focus, which I think is the only way to win. Like these people that are, like, oh, I'm going to burn it all in my lifetime. Like I don't know. You might as well be a shit coiner to me. Like, I just don't have time for these people.
Peter McCook book.
Yeah. Like this. Yeah. Find a fucking Aston Martin. Like, I don't. And it's the whole deal is it's fuck you money. So no one can tell you what to do with it. So if that's what you want to do with it, it's none of my business. But I can tell you, I think it's a stupid waste of a life. And you can ignore me if you want to. It's totally fine. But I don't know. I just think it's super important to think through that stuff and to really, because a lot of people haven't spent, very much time. Like I've known a couple of people that had big exits from tech startups or something like that. That's probably the closest parallel. And, known people that go from, 6-figure net worth to 8-figure net worth in, a couple of years, because that's how, because that's how long it it takes to sell or exit or whatever. And that's a pretty wild thing, and that's totally normal stuff within the existing fiat system. Like that, doesn't happen all the time, but it is relatively frequent. And it does happen, but I don't know, but to see that start happening at scale and to say, no, I'm not gonna sell any, yeah, I could buy, this thing with a tiny percent, but it's like that stuff just builds and builds and builds. And then you get to the end of your life and you realize you fucked it up. And I think that's something to avoid at all costs. And I don't know, one of the many reasons I think kids are so important for all this, just on top of being the absolute most fun way to spend time on the face of the earth. But in addition to that, it's like really thinking about, well, they're going to have kids someday and those kids are going to have kids someday. Like, what am I doing to affect the world that those, currently non-existent humans are going to live in? What am I doing to prepare it for them directly? I think it's, a whole bunch of interesting stuff to think about.
Yeah.
Ideally while high, but I won't judge anyone who does it sober.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of the way I look at what's coming is it's going to look like those cities that tornadoes go through and just level, entire neighborhoods except for like one house, and the Bitcoiners are going to be the one with the house still standing, and people are going to be looking around, at their houses destroyed and see this one house still standing and, kind of be looking at it like, what do we do next? And, yeah, so I think that's, it's going to be pretty crazy, with what happens in the future. But I think a good one, the idea of multi-generational wealth is a really, really interesting one. I think another way that's kind of interesting to prepare is to go watch Lord of War with Nicolas Cage and go look at, what's going to be available on the market. You might be able to go buy some nuclear submarines or some F-35s or, some sick Black Hawk helicopters. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, I think ultimately, like, what's really important to me is targeting the remnant right now, finding the people that are not, look at the masses with, a ton of, what's the word? Animosity, unless they're people that are like coming after me personally and trying to make my life miserable. But I think the fiat monetary system really conditions people to be zombies, in our system because their bases are getting destroyed, and they're lacking a lot of stability. They're caught up in debt slavery and incentivized to spend everything instead of thinking in the future, kind of like Lyric was saying in the chat. Like, people, do not look for multi-generational wealth because, the system doesn't really allow for it because they can't save and they can't build equity in their own lives. They have to build equity in these stupid Ponzi schemes like the stock market and pension funds and, whatever else. And I think, having a conversation like this, like, to a certain degree, a lot of us are pretty privileged, to have gotten Bitcoin and to understand this, to have stability in our lives with how crazy things are out there. And I think, like, going to the remnant and creating, a circular economy of Bitcoin users and building out infrastructure, it might not have to be a catastrophic switch, because if the infrastructure is there to just, on-ramp people easily so that they don't have to be, not eating and not being able to transact and getting censored and all this bullshit, they can choose to opt out if possible, is huge. And I think the infrastructure, is growing so much and making it so much easier, to be a part of that. And it gets me excited, especially with the Lightning Network, what's happening right now. But that's kind of my take on it, and what I'm trying to do more in the short term. In the long term, it's kind of hard to wrap my brain around it. But yeah, I like the idea, that you bring up a lot, Skeef, of, really looking in the future and trying to create a world that I would want, kids to live in. I think that's incredibly, incredibly important, for bringing a sense of purpose and meaning into, our lives in the short term.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know where that remnant term originates. I'm in that Telegram group that Svetsky and Polio and those guys set up, and I love that. I love that crowd so much, and I love that idea. But I need to look into where exactly that term originates from, because it is a really fantastic term, and I totally agree. That's that's the motivation for doing this every Monday, is to connect with more, and hopefully in some way, maybe potentially, help like a few people who are part of that remnant and who are not, I'd rather connect with, the 5 people on tonight than, just a million random idiots out there. And that, I don't know, like that I think is super important. And that's why, like I'm super excited about the Sierra Vista meetup. Starting basically Sierra Vista, for those who don't know, Arizona is essentially the absolute heart of the military industrial complex in Arizona, at least, and, maybe the Southwest. And these, you talk about, I don't even know how many CIA contractors there are down there, and giant Fort Huachuca Army base, like, Tucson has a giant Air Force base. There's just military people all over the place. And I think it's a lot of people who are primed for, like, really, really understanding Bitcoin, because a lot of, it's just like your example earlier of, punching a cop, that's not, that's, to me, like, that's the exact same thing as saying central banking's terrible and immoral and awful. So I'm going to go down to my local Chase Bank branch and just, deck the teller with whoever's at the desk. It's like, to me, like, that makes just as much sense. Like, you're playing their game on their terms, and they're just going to throw you in a cage, and that'll be the end of it. And so, but like really thinking about, well, how do, because a lot of these people are good people, very, very, who just haven't woken up to what exactly is going on, and to play some small role in providing them an alternative to, to being completely dependent on, like, literally their income, everything is dependent on the state, comes from the state, their orders, what they can do, what they can't, like, the state runs their entire lives. Mm-hmm. And, it's a similar parallel to, I think, like, what Native Americans experienced. Like, I last month read a really good book on Crazy Horse, and it's like the really kind of core thing that he really grokked onto, or that's the wrong word used, but like the thing that he really held on to that really made him special and unique, at least as I understood it, is he understood that war with, the white man, with the federal government, was not about honor. It was not about respect. It was not about, there was no integrity. He's like, this is a war of attrition, and our body count needs to be as high as possible. And that's all there is to it. But he understood the game that was being played, and he ultimately lost because, the federal government's just, had at the time had basically unlimited resources. But he was so much more successful because he understood the game that was being played. And I think that's our opportunity, is to really wake people up to the game that's being played. And, no, all these public pensions are going to be completely worthless. So just from pure selfish motivation, you've got to have an alternative for that. Like, even if you don't subscribe to any of the freedom stuff. But then on top of that, you have this fundamentally corrupt and evil entity that's running literally your entire life. The people that wake up to that realization, I think, are going to be prime candidates for understanding, what Bitcoin offers and what we can build with it. And, I want, it's like, it literally is like a missionary type thing. Like, you just want to see as many of them get saved as possible.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. Okay, so I got the Remnant origin pulled up. So nice. It's from written by Albert J. Nock. I don't have the date on when it was public or written, but it's an article called Isaiah's Job, and Albert J. Nock was an influential American libertarian author, educational theorist, social critic, and so he was kind of an inspiration to Murray Rothbard. He's one of my all-time favorites. But yeah, I definitely enjoy this model of hanging out with you guys, because ultimately, like, when we get together with Bitcoiners, when we get together with people that are really on the same wavelength and are not just mindless automatons, it is so rewarding and freeing, and you kind of contrast that with what's happening in a lot of the, Bitcoin space, where people, this idea of going, oh man, one of my panels is falling off. There we go. Back in action. You look at what's happening in the wider Bitcoin space, where you've got people like Pomp, and you've got people like Peter McCormick that are willing to water down the message of what we're doing here, and they get bigger audiences, and they make more money out of it because they're going and they're preaching to the masses. And then you contrast that with Tales from the Crypt, where they have such good quality content, and are interacting with the remnant, with people that are not part of that group, that are just wanting to buy Bitcoin on Coinbase and just let it sit there and watch the number go up. And that's those are my people, and that's such a more effective strategy if we're going to create change. And then on the topic of Crazy Horse, if you're ever in South Dakota, instead of going to Mount Rushmore, go check out the Crazy Horse monument. It's pretty dope. It's way cooler. And then we had Geronimo and a lesser known guy, Chief Cochise, out here in southern Arizona, those guys were badass, and they were fighting the federal government, using, pretty epic guerrilla warfare. Those guys are legends. I've been on a Native American kick lately. Just this weekend, actually, took the kids down to it's called the Marind Museum. And it's like an abbreviation or something for American Indian, but it's in Dragoon, Arizona, maybe hour or so southeast of Tucson. That was super cool. Like we were there for probably 2.5 hours just reading. Like they just had so much cool stuff there, reading about it. Yeah. That was mostly Geronimo was kind of the focus of that one, because he was there in the Chiricahua or something like that mountains. What's that called down there? I think they were both in the Dragoon Mountains, but they might have. Okay. Yeah, there's a cluster of mountains in that whole area. So the Huachucas, I think the Chiricahuas and the Dragoons are all right in there. Yeah, there's some beautiful, beautiful places to buy land all throughout there. It's cheap. Yeah, some of it depend. Like I found this one that's, it's $2 million, but so it's not gonna happen. But there were like caves all throughout it. There were like caves that looked like, at least from the pictures, you could build out into like potentially like a place to live and stuff like that. And I don't know. I just think that'd be super badass. But, yeah, I've always wanted to do that. Yeah, I read some Robinson Crusoe as a kid, and they did that. They built out in some caves, and my graphics all messed up tonight. Whatever. Yeah, there's a house down by Bisbee that's basically built into they essentially carved out. I read an article about it. I forget where exactly it is, but I know it's in the general area of Bisbee. It was like a small cave, and they basically carved out into a giant rock wall, like their house. And so the inside, I'll show you pictures later, but the inside is just beautiful, because the whole inside is just rock, and they like literally carved shelves out of the rock. It's nuts. That's so dope. Lurk says Con Air is a top 3 movie of all time. I could see that, as long as you're counting the Matrix trilogy as one movie. Because if not, then that's the top 3 movies of all time. From an absolute non-movie buff who is, potentially retarded when it comes to movies. But I do like the Matrix a lot. What's the Met Gala? Must be something on tonight, like an award show or something. Yeah. Zorn, be better. # be better. Zorn. Yeah. Crazy Canadian. I don't know. I'll always be a massive Star Wars nerd. That's always up there in my top. That and The Lord of the Rings. I just like that underdog story of going up against incredibly evil people and winning. But I do have you ever seen the Empire Did Nothing Wrong crew? Mm-mm. There's a subreddit called The Empire Did Nothing Wrong. Those guys are hilarious. But it's kind of like a mock of statism right now. Because you're going and you're if you look at the state is ultimately the most destructive construct in in human history. Essentially, the way that they're able to amass resources to create massive destruction, and it's pretty apparent in the 20th and 21st century that it's been the most destructive force. But so kind of arguing for the importance of the state. This is why it drives me crazy about conservatives. We had shitting on conservatives on our list. That's always fun. Cuck-servatives. Yeah. They're so... it's funny to me, like, how much conservatives hate people of the libertarian anarchist persuasion. And this is a big reason why, I think I like to say that Texas LARPs is because it's conservative culture. Yep. They're like, we're about freedom, but we'll throw you in a cage if you smoke this plant. Yeah. And that's what a lot of people think. I hate Texas. I don't have a problem with Texas. I just don't think it's any different from Alabama or Georgia or Mississippi or Louisiana or Kentucky or, all these other red states. They're just another kind of standard conservative state, which is fine. But if you want to live in liberty, you can come out to Arizona. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've had constitutional carry for a long time, and they just finally decided that you can own a gun carry a gun with limited restrictions.
Yeah.
Took them till 2021 to figure that one out.
And it's, yeah.
Barbers.
Arizona has an extremely lenient definition of what brandishing is too. Like you could, I don't know. Yeah. You can do, like if somebody threatens you in any way, you could like pull up your shirt and be like, you know, if you take another step, I'm going to kill you. And that's totally legal.
Yeah. Indiana, Don Reddy says Indiana's more free than Texas. I'm a big fan of Indiana.
Yeah. I spent some time in Indiana. I had a good time there.
Indianapolis is kind of lame, but some of the smaller cities. My grandparents grew up in Indiana, in small town Indiana, and I think it's a super cool state. Mm-hmm. They've got like a great community. Like they're have such a huge importance around basketball.
Yeah. And
I think things like that are kind of cool, you know, where you get communities come together and you know, really pull energy to things like that versus like being so obsessed with, you know, the federal government. This is something that kind of bums me out about culture today is like not really spending time getting to know your neighbors and people in your local community versus, you know, sitting on the news and whining about Chairman Biden, you know, and how we need to vote differently. It's kind of silly to me. Conservatives. Yeah.
I was talking to a guy who was he's a very conservative guy, you know, like Trump, all that kind of stuff. He's a lawyer, and just explaining kind of how Bitcoin works. You know, I said, like, for example, like if I wanted to move $100 million today, I could do it for about 10 cents, you know, maybe 50 cents if I wanted to really overpay on fees. And there's no entity on the face of the earth that can stop it. You know, no government, no bank, like nothing, you know, and it's the exact same thing for 100 billion, you know, or for 100, you know, trillion someday once everything's inflated away, you know, and he's like, oh, that's terrible. They've got to shut that down. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I thought you were like small government, you know, anti-state or whatever. And he's like, well, yeah, but like to an extent, like you can't just be able to send around that much money around. I'm like, of course you can. That's the whole value proposition. And then, I don't know, we talked back and forth for a little bit, and then I just kind of left it at, well, the thing that you hate is, in my opinion, one of the most important parts of the whole thing. So we're probably just going to have to agree to disagree on this one.
Yeah. AK-47 suggests to invite your neighbor to Toxic Airway.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's
a great way to bond.
Take a lesson from AK-47. Invite your neighbor over to listen to a couple of crazies yell about Bitcoin.
And make fun of conservatives in Texas. Speaking of making fun of Texas, we have Phil Gibson on the Spaces.
Nice. What's up, Phil?
Lick my nutsack.
Hey, fuck Texas.
How you doing tonight, Phil?
Yeah. All right.
Nice.
Am I coming clear, or does it sound like crap because I'm using my Bluetooth?
Sounds all right.
Sounds okay.
We'll give you a B minus.
I'll be in Austin for the 22nd beefsteak, so party.
Nice.
See you there, Phil.
Yeah, I didn't go to the last one that was here, but I sagged my tickets the other day, so I'm looking forward to it.
Nice.
You got anything for us tonight?
I was in the Spaces earlier today, and they were talking about how people were going to use CBDCs to basically use them to get beer and then sell that beer for Bitcoin. And it's just very ironic how CBDCs retard the growth of innovation in economics in the free market, because you end up actually bartering again all over again. And, you know, that's why we have money that works, so we don't have to do that. And it's just how the black market, quote unquote black market, or the free market, really just finds a way. Just like in Jurassic Park, a life finds a way. Free market finds a way, and it's also Gresham's law of like shitty money, like getting rid of the shitty money any way you can to get the good money. And so I thought that was a fun experiment to just kind of contemplate and twist around.
That is hilarious if you think about it.
I think there's a lot of, you know, we're kind of talking about Native Americans earlier and their experience with the federal government. I think there's a lot of parallels between that whole process of developing, at the time they called them associations, but now reservations, and the way that they roll out these. What is Odell? What's his abbreviation? CBD, it's basically central bank digital cuck bucks, whatever that abbreviation is.
CBDCB.
Yeah, that's what it is. And but it's like this idea of like how dangerous it is to let them get a foothold in your personal life. Like I this is not something I've totally decided on, but I'm definitely leaning toward like never accepting any UBI, never using it, never, whatever digital wallet they set up, never claiming it, just because like, yeah, it would be nice to have some free shit, but what comes with that is control, and what comes with that is leverage over you. And even if you're like, oh well, I'm rich outside of this, I don't need it, blah blah, maybe, but it's like that. It's just one more toehold that they have in your, in your day-to-day life, in your spending, and what you're buying. It's all that surveillance that comes with it. I mean, the whole point of it is surveillance, and yeah, I don't know. Like I said, it's not something I'm totally decided on, but I'm definitely leaning towards not having any involvement with that system whatsoever, no matter what the temporary costs are.
Yeah, it makes sense. I could definitely have experienced this to a certain degree already. So one thing my mom did, when I was a kid, was I liked to do a lot of drugs, and she would give me the Visa gift cards to try and prevent me from doing drugs, and you could just buy stuff with it and barter and essentially do that trade. But yeah, Phil, we got a question for you. Don is curious how Jurassic Park fits into this. Wants you to explain that a little bit better.
What was that?
I have no idea.
Is that your cat? Phil, you might be using a cat filter or a chipmunk filter or something
Do
like
they
that
have
on your
voice
audio.
filters on Spaces?
I don't know what the kids are into these days.
So tech.
Okay, yeah, there's some kind of voice filter.
All right. Well, I don't think that really explains it.
I think the point is he said life finds a way. So I believe, and Phil, once you turn off the filters, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I understood was that they said life finds a way, like life finds a way to develop, and as I understood it, the parallel is the free market will find a way to develop. Mm-hmm. So if people get, you see it with food stamps today. Like people buy stuff with food stamps and then flip it for cash all the time. So I think he was saying we'll see similar things like that once UBI starts getting rolled out.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, this is something that's super funny when people rail on capitalism and free markets as being a bad thing, and this is another reason why conservatives are really dumb when they're talking about economics, is because ultimately free markets are the most natural state of things, and the more you clamp down on them and implement tariffs and taxes and whatever else, subsidies, the more it creates black markets, to me, because if you're not getting the basic things that you need at a price that's reasonable, like and you can find it cheaper and somebody can deliver it cheaper outside of it, like people are going to do that. And, one really interesting example, there's this guy named Michael Franchese who is a big mob guy, and he was running a racket selling gas to people, and all he was able to do is, deliver gas to these stations without taxes, and was able to, drop the price substantially, like maybe 4 or 5 cents a gallon for these gas stations, and make these crazy margins on it, just because, if you go to next time you go to the gas station, they have a little thing that says, how many taxes you pay per gallon. I think it's 16 cents in Arizona, and it might be more than that. It might be like 32 cents a gallon. So it's absolutely absurd. And you just think about, these things.
And did he go to prison and then get out?
Yeah, he went to prison.
I'm like 60% sure he went on Mike Tyson's podcast. Yeah, Mike Tyson had a former mob guy on there. I think that was his name. Yeah. And it was, which by the way, check out Mike Tyson's podcast. Very, very good.
I love stories like that because I ultimately believe in redemption. And second chances. And that guy, you know, has such an inspirational story because he gets out of prison and then dedicates his entire life to helping people in prison. And I think stories like that are super cool.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, for me, like Bitcoin is in many ways a redemption in my life. You know, it's pulling me out of this fiat brained lifestyle, out of high time preference. And, you know, I, you know, really am inspired by stories like that, because I think that, you know, he went from living in this awful, crazy, you know, illicit lifestyle where he was, you know, a part of an organization that was victimizing people, to then going back and helping people that are some of the most marginalized in our society. And I think that's just so incredible.
Yeah. And and like that, you know, like something that I think Bitcoin is going to largely do away with is like this whole idea of somebody's life being ruined because of something that happened in the past or one decision or whatever. Because it's like the more we can eliminate all these state apparatus from, you know, from the decision-making criteria, you know, once there's no such thing as a felony, like once these things are just totally gone, then it's, you know, today, are you a, you know, decent person that can do something valuable for me? If the answer is yes, then okay, like let's, you know, okay, I'll pay you to do this, or you pay me to do this, or we work on this together and we make that, you know, it's like those are the criteria that matter. And it's not like, you know, are you today a decent person that can do something valuable, and have you also been completely perfect for the last 20 years? No, there's none of that. It's going to, you know, it's, I think it really, I don't know, it almost, it's not something I've thought about a ton, but it almost seems like it kind of like, I don't know if it incentivizes second chances, but it certainly I think makes them a lot more doable. And it really destroys a lot of the terrible structures that cause, you know, one decision or one thing from a long time ago to fundamentally change the direction of somebody's life.
Yeah. And I think, like, you know, people that might not have gone down the anarchist wormhole might look at something like this and be like, well, what about, you know, the people that hurt kids, and what about, you know, murderers and stuff like that?
Public execution.
Yeah, exactly. There's ultimately, you know, in a system like that, there's actual real world consequences, because there's not a state standing in the way, you know, preventing you from protecting yourself. And like something that drives me insane that I think, you know, is a really important conversation to have about, like what you kind of alluded to was, you know, if you get out of prison, you're a felon, you know, probably the majority of people are in there for drug related stuff. You can't go and you have to put that on your resume when you're going to get a job. It makes it much more difficult to step outside of that lifestyle as a result of it. You can't buy a gun to protect yourself. You can't even vote, which is like one of the stupidest things. Like voting, you know, I don't think really does anything, but like, why would they take that away from you? You know, that's one of the, maybe because, I don't know, they think that, you know, people would vote to end these policies if they've been put in cages. But, yeah, it's one of my favorite books of all time is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, because it outlines, you know, the story of a felon getting out of prison. You know, he'd been put in prison for a long time because he stole a loaf of bread because his family was starving, and just, you know, kind of this battle with getting out and, you know, walking into redemption. But these are my types of people, you know, like I used to volunteer in the Pima County Jail, and those are my types of people. Those are the people that have the most to gain from Bitcoin. It gets me super stoked thinking about it.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, and there's going to be, I think there's just going to be a lot of opportunities in that area. And there's a lot of models in past cultures for what justice looks like without the state. It's not Anatomy of the State. I'm blanking on, I can't remember the title. But anyway, there's another Rothbard book that's a little bit longer, maybe 500, 600 pages, something like that, but that goes through, I can't believe I can't remember the title. But anyway, another book that goes through, it's like, sorry, go ahead.
Are you thinking ethics of,
yes.
Ethics of liberty.
Ethics of liberty. And that's where he goes through a lot of the specifics on what society without the state looks like. And there's, I mean, we're talking about, child predators, sexual offenders, stuff like that. I mean, there are a lot of cultures in the past where, like let's say a woman gets raped, the way that that's dealt with is that her male family members get to determine the fate of the guy that did it. Spoiler alert, doesn't go very well for him.
Yeah.
And, or someone like if somebody, hurts a kid, that kid's family, or if, or there were also like different tribes would have mechanisms for, being able to delegate that decision and that authority, different things like that. But it's, it's like when you localize, the harm is obviously incredibly local. It affects individuals. And then when you localize the response to that, I think it's a much more viable path forward. Just because if somebody's, like some of these things, if somebody's capable of that, that person just doesn't belong in society. I mean, it's like, to me, public execution of, people that hurt kids that's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important to distinguish, like, being anti-government, but being pro-governance. You're going to have governance. You're going to have hierarchies. These things are important because they're inherent in nature.
Yep.
But you need to let nature do its thing, because life finds a way. Like, I keep repeating that, but it's just natural that you do have structures that form based off of voluntary interaction and learning from people's human actions, learning what works and what doesn't work. That applies to rules, and essentially that is the free market, because you're sending signals to each other of what is productive and what retards productivity. So you'll see a business that's successful, and then when another business is less successful because it screwed over the customers, and that that's a hindrance to their reputation. And it's just trial and error, and you need that in everything. And that's essentially how people will govern themselves. And they'll turn into municipalities. And Rothbard, I think, I never finished Ethics of Liberty, but I think he gets into it, and he gets kind of inspired by the stuff that Hoppe probably wrote about, how you just opt into these contracts. It's just like contract law. And if you follow the rules, you're good. And if you don't, then there's going to be consequences.
Mm-hmm.
But the important thing is that it's voluntary.
Yes.
And so these are all solutions that are based in free markets.
Yeah, I think that's great.
And that's the absolutely critical distinction, is voluntary versus non-voluntary.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think like, oh, well, an HOA is the same thing as the government because it tells you how long your yard can be, which is a completely false equivalence, because people opt into, if I don't want an HOA, I'll go live somewhere else. I can, if, somebody, let's say I want a whole bunch of, junk cars in my front yard, and HOA doesn't allow that, then, well, I can go live out in the desert in Arizona, and I can have a whole junkyard in my front yard if I want to. But like that ability to opt out is the difference, because there is no ability to, especially the federal government's the easiest example. Like there's no mechanism by which we can, because even if you leave the country, you're technically still, a U.S. citizen as far as taxes are concerned. So they technically still own your income, and they still own your ability to produce value. Even if, anywhere you go on the globe, you could be on Antarctica, and you're, if you're getting paid for work, you're technically supposed to file a tax return for that. It's just like this completely bananas, insane idea. And yeah, like that, like, I don't know, that's another thing that I think people are starting to realize.
Yeah, and on top of that, like with the HOA stuff, there's no implied consent, like there supposedly is today, because, it's difficult to be born into any country in the world and just move elsewhere. Like when you're moving into an HOA, you're buying a house or renting a house in HOA, you're doing your research on the rules and the laws, and you can do that, there could be a lot of different organizations in a small geographical area. But like with the structure of how it is today, looking at going outside of the United States, it's not always an easy question, because everywhere, is structured in a similar way, where you've got, these fiat hierarchies that are just complete bullshit. And, you know, the best example is of this playing out is, like, you look at Jeffrey Epstein. Like, that guy only, you know, existed and operated because of the state, you know. And if it wasn't for the state, that guy wouldn't have been able to get away with it for, you know, a year even.
Well, and on top of that, he wouldn't have had any money.
Yeah.
I mean, this idea that he made his money investing, like, you have to be completely brain dead to believe that. Like, he just had, you know, like, you know, CIA, Mossad, but also just random billionaires would just cut him checks, you know, for his brilliant advice or, you know, whatever they sell it as. And it's just, like, obviously nonsense. Like, this guy, he's a perfect example of somebody who has no ability to produce value in, you know, a Bitcoin standard world, and would be, you know, we wouldn't even know his name because this guy would have never accumulated power and resources in a Bitcoin standard world, because he has, you know, all he can do is the only way he can do anything valuable is through coercion and through violence and through just all this horrific stuff that he's into.
Yeah.
And probably still is, because I don't think he's dead, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah. We know what you were doing, Bill Gates.
Yeah.
Hey guys, pro tip: don't use the voice filters because it crashes your app.
Voice filters on.
Lurk had some very, very good financial advice for you, which was to sell them for food stamps. Those voice filters.
Huh?
Lurk said, Phil, sell that audio filter for food stamps. So,
Oh.
I don't know. I thought that was pretty good financial advice, actually.
Why would I sell it for food stamps?
The
government's not my customer.
So you can buy government cheese. I don't know.
Food stamps are definitely more valuable than those filters.
Yes. Even government coupons.
Yeah.
Of coupons, because dollars are government coupons. So they're like coupons of coupons.
Yeah. Shout out to Chairman Biden for his endless altruistic attitudes towards the lower classes and the serfs by giving everybody a 25% pay raise on their food stamps. What a guy.
Yeah. It's not quite matching inflation, but it's close.
No. Yeah, I had in my presentation, this is like my favorite meme. I'm thinking about doing a billboard campaign with it, but putting the average price of Bitcoin, the average price of houses in dollars with Bitcoin right under it in 2016 in Tucson, and then the average in 2021 with the house, and like the dollar price like doubles, and the Bitcoin price is like a fraction of what it was. I think it was like 220 Bitcoin for a house in Tucson in 2016, and then 2021 it's like 6.2.
Wow.
And then with the house it almost doubles in dollar value. I think that's a great meme.
Should probably round down to 6.15, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the day, I like calculated at like 45 or 46, I think, because that's what it was at when I was presenting. But yeah, we get it up to 48,000.
Yeah.
That might be accurate. Yeah, conservatives are on my shit list. I think like one of the biggest reasons, there's this guy at a Libertarian Party meeting, and like I said, I have to throw this caveat: I hate politics, and I don't believe in the Libertarian Party politics, but I believe in the people there. I think that they're part of the remnant, or at least some of them are. And that's why I participate in it. I just have to throw that caveat every time I mention them. But I don't think it's a waste of time going there. But there was a guy from the Republican Party that was there, and I tried, to push him towards the Libertarian Party. He's like, no, we need to go with the existing power structures and change things from the inside. I'm like, dude, you're so cucked. It's unbelievable.
All right, why don't you go suck Mitch McConnell's dick then? How's that sound?
Yeah.
I think that there's merit if you already have an established, post and you have a way to work your way up, and you do the Rand Paul or Thomas Massey kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm still an anarchist, but I mean, this is how Rothbard worked. Like, he started in his early days in the 70s and shit, trying to placate to the left and, red pill them into liberty. And then he started doing like the right and the paleo conservatives and the Pat Buchanans and all of that. And so basically, and I've heard from a lot of libertarians, like, you know, if you're going to vote like Republican. And I know that's going to sound like cringy to some people, but at the end of the day, they're shitty. They're probably fucking war hawks. They're probably bad on this and that. But at the end of the day, you need the idea with, because just recently it was CJ Wilson, others, and people at Capitol started a 514, which I think is just a tier under being a super PAC, but they got the chance to sit down and take in Bitcoin, and it's a vote of if you not participate in politics, that is going to be controlled by the politicians and provide incentive to lack just a little bit of it. They have in the game, and if you get pilled, you give them another constituency, and there's nothing wrong with being a voter. That is your one issue. That's everything. And so I'm just bullish on being in politics. I'm not saying that like you guys aren't. Recently, my perspective on politics has totally changed, and I'm just more optimistic. And this is going to start at a local level, as people have said, like Marty and others. But I even saw this last year when my parents, you know, they live in like a upper middle class, mostly like white neighborhood, you know, right voting mostly, but there's a lot of like progressive bullshit there too. And voting for things like, you know, transgender rights, like that's fine, but you know, 12-year-old girls going through hormone therapy and like, you know, forcing other kids to call them this pronoun or that pronoun, and just these corrupt freakazoids that get on top of the school boards. It's just like that critical race theory shit. I mean, this stuff won't stand, and the only way to really change that is to vote on a local level. Now, it's a pain in the ass that whoever you vote for locally, they go represent who, you know, they represent the nation, because their vote is going to, you know, indirectly impact who you vote for the president, because, you know, if you vote Republican for local reasons, that Republican representative will probably vote for whoever's wearing the red tie that's running for office. But still, like, it really all matters, like, locally. And I think a lot more people have woken up to that in this past year, and especially the past couple of weeks. And so my whole perspective and optimism for being involved in politics has changed. But of course, that's only Bitcoin, but it can.
I can appreciate that, and I know tons and tons of Bitcoiners who take that perspective, but I definitely would not agree. Like my personal view, any involvement with politics is very, very misguided and very poor strategy, and the energy that we put that is diverted away from individuals building empowerment. And it's like I take this tier of individuals accumulate enough economic power and not a second before. And I know like especially like, you know, the guys I know, you know, have talked to from Unchained or wherever that's, and it's not anything that I get worked up about. But like I definitely don't like support like that, or like running for office or anything. Like, to me, that's a very, you know, and I could totally be wrong about this, but like, to me, that's a very fundamental misunderstanding of like what Bitcoin offers and what we can do. And that it's like the move, I think. So like, perfect example, I think, is that Sierra Vista meetup that we mentioned. That, you know, it's like there's a 0.0% chance that meetup is going to have any kind of an effect on the military industrial complex. But there's a virtually 100% chance that a few individuals' lives will be fundamentally changed by, you know, finding Bitcoin through that meetup. And that's what I'm about. That's what I'm about, is reaching, the remnant. I love that term, like reaching those people, and that, just like taking the assumption that the strong majority of the population, call it 80%, has no mind, is completely irrelevant, and will continue to support tyranny, period. And
yeah,
and I don't know. And it's like like the Republican versus Democrat thing. To me, that is not clear at all. I mean, look at George Bush's body count. I mean, these things like this, like to me, like this idea that one, like I obviously, I don't support kids on transgender medicine, but I think the Iraq War is a billion times worse. I mean, I would argue George Bush was fundamentally far more evil than Biden is. Like as far as what he accomplished, like in the real world, what he made happen in the real world. And that's
what he did. Like to be fair, I believe Bush was just really the puppet and was run by Cheney and the whole fucking neocons and the Richard Pearls and everything. But I'm saying, like, you can have the Bitcoin strategy of the free market and making technology and solutions that work, but then you can also have the strategy to lobby the politicians that are on Bitcoin or get them on Bitcoin to vote in your favor, because I think that works too, just because of the incentives of Bitcoin. I'm not saying that you have to run, but if you're just vocal and you actually like engage in some politics, it doesn't have to be your fucking life, but it's still an option that can work.
And the thing that I would disagree with, and like I said, this is not anything that I get super worked up about, but I think that is a misunderstanding of the power dynamic that Bitcoin offers. Like this idea that they're in a position of power and authority over us, and I don't think that's accurate at all. Like I think, there's a classic Saifedean tweet from 2017, I think, something like that, where he says Bitcoin is not a technology advancement like the iPhone that will get adopted because it's cool. It's a technology advancement like gunpowder. Basically use it or it's going to get used against you. And that, I think us being, if I donate $100 to a Bitcoin super PAC, that's $100 of sats that I don't have. And I think that's even at that level, I think it's very misguided. And like I said, I don't have any problem with anybody who disagrees and takes a different approach. Like I have no interest in telling anybody what to do with their money or, their time or whatever. But yeah, that's definitely the perspective I take, that I will have as close to zero involvement with the state as possible.
I don't know if I would encourage people to don't. I don't know.
Yeah,
just talking to them and engaging in general definitely helps on like the regulatory front. Maybe, I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but it'll make that transition, that painful transition, less painful. And I also agree that Bitcoin's going to do Bitcoin, and like fuck the state, like the state can't turn it off, and it's going to win inevitably. But
yeah,
it's the same thing as orange pilling, right? Like the more people like know and are educated on it, like you have the constitutional like take to actually guess this, and so maybe he will like vote in your favor. But again, it's not like the end of the world if that doesn't work. It is an option. It is a strategy. It should not be the only option. But the fact that it is, and that we're seeing more people actually start to think and change their minds and try to make positive change in Bitcoin's favor, that's, I feel like that's a net good.
Yeah. And I'll say one super quick thing, and then I think somebody else had a comment, which is just that like I had this conversation in Dallas, but it's like, my fiat income goes to zero if Bitcoin gets outlawed. And so I have really, really high, personal incentive to, to care about what these people do. But I still, that doesn't give me any pause at all in kind of taking this approach. But yeah, I think somebody else on Spaces had a comment.
Gazela, what you got?
Hey, I was just gonna say, I think I've spoken with some of the same people as Phil, and I don't really care what happens in politics. I find it annoying, and like I mentioned earlier, I've never voted except for this recall in California. But having spoken, I think, with some of the same people, I prefer that these are kind of like, for the most part, a lot of them are plebs, and they're just like, some of them do this for a living, and some of them do it just out of like a passion project. And I'm like, if they want to go do it, that's fine. Like, I'm not involved. I can't care less. I know that Bitcoin will survive, but I'd much rather it be people that I know in the space that like I know are plebs versus, I don't know, people that would like work for Michael Saylor or something. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like the plebs that are talking to these people in higher positions, like you said, they're doing it out of the best of their heart. And because that the politicians do give them the time of day, like an hour with Ted Cruz. Granted, it was over Zoom, but like they had spent an hour talking to the dude. They are basically saying, hey, do you want to fucking pay attention? Do you want your vote? Do you want to, keep doing this? Do you want to stay employed? Like, I'm sure his pension is great and everything, whatever, he's cush. But still, like, he's still in that position in the Senate, right? He's got to be a senator. But still, he's in that position, and he's going to keep trying to stay in that position. And the best way to do that, especially with fears of Texas flipping blue, which I doubt will happen, but who fucking knows? The best thing you can do is increase your constituency, your voter base, your voter block. And who better to fucking do that than rich-ass Bitcoiners? Like, that's what I'm talking about the incentive of Bitcoin. I don't know. I just feel like it's just kind of like a win-win.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a difference between going out and like having expectations on voting versus
it's lobbying. Like, that's what the Bitcoiners are doing. They're sitting them down and lobbying it and be like, hey, bitch, do you want my fucking vote? Fucking vote for Bitcoin, bro. Fuck you. I'm not going to vote you, and I'm going to go slander your ass. Not that Ted Cruz doesn't get enough slandering because people call him the Zodiac Killer or whatever, but
I think
still,
it was his dad.
Like, and the Republican Party is really like prime, like breeding ground for this lobbying and just getting them involved and saying, hey, like, do you want to keep getting votes? You got a shit ton of nice plebs here that just want to, for the most part, Bitcoiners, I find, just want to live like nice, conservative lifestyles, have big ass families, live on a farm, whatever. Hey, we also have a shit ton of money, real sound money. So that can go a lot further than where you think it's going to go right now, especially when Bitcoin hits $1 million or whatever the fuck. So, at the end of the day, money talks. So why not talk to them with the best money in the fucking world?
Yeah. I think, like, the way I see it with politics, because if you look at, like, a Thomas Massey or Rand Paul, they're not really accomplishing anything legislatively. Ron Paul, didn't really accomplish anything legislatively, but they opened up the door for a conversation. And so I think there's
exactly
and there's some value to that, and I'm like mulling over my head on whether, it's worth it or it's morally acceptable for me to go and vote for like Dave Smith in the next presidential election, kind of for that reason, because he's going to be having, a massive platform to talk about.
It's one vote that the blue tie or red tie doesn't get.
Yeah. Well, they wouldn't get my vote anyways, but yeah, I mean, it was cool seeing Guy Swan on there, but it's interesting because like you look at the critical race theories, that stuff in school, and that might be one of the best things that could possibly happen to our community, because what is the result of that? What's the result of the mask mandates in schools? It's that everybody's pulling their kids out, and there's a massive homeschooling effort, and that's something like the Tucson Libertarian Party is hugely active in, is giving people resources to homeschool their kids, and I think that's a massive response. And then with the vax mandates, people are starting to question, a lot of other, mandates that are happening right now, and are starting to realize it and not be very, enchanted with the government's actions. So I would think that almost it's as effective of going and voting for, tyrannical politicians as it is for, ones that are a little bit less tyrannical. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I always, conflate voting with choosing who I want to steal from me. And I think opting out and kind of making these guys irrelevant, that's where Bitcoin is trending regardless. And we just kind of have to survive until then.
And who knows? We saw with Ron Paul, they basically just canceled him, or they just gave him the worst coverage. But if we can do that with a Bitcoin-esque, politician, what that really signals is that they fear us. We have something of value to say, and we change people's minds. All the people's minds that were changed when they heard of Ron Paul. Think of how many people we can do that with Bitcoin, and it's going to be exponentially more powerful because Bitcoin is money. People like money. People are greedy. Used to agree against them, but it doesn't hurt them. It's in their favor, and that's game theory. And so, if we can get a lot of politicians, then it's just orange pilling so many people at once.
Yeah, I just don't think the idea of getting politically active as an actual it is actually going to change things, because I'm against the mandates, I'm against the tyrants in my local politics, but at the end of the day,
changing people's minds fundamentally of how they view the world through Bitcoin doesn't change anything.
I would
active in politics.
Yeah, I would say involvement with politics is definitely counterproductive to that goal.
So
and that's something that obviously a lot of people disagree on. But
so say
voting, talking to politicians, anything.
Yeah, so say
if you vote locally for someone that can actually change shit that you have to deal with on a daily basis.
But I'm such a small minority. If I go to the voting booth, in Tucson specifically, it's been democratically controlled, and that there's structures put in place to, kind of keep the system like that. It doesn't matter how many people I rally to go, and vote. It's going to be a losing effort.
It absolutely does matter. It absolutely does matter. And I don't mean to just cut you off there, but thank you for giving me an opportunity to pipe in here. I'll mute in a moment. Politics is the act of coordinating efforts that is not defined in and enforced by law, right? It's everything that we do in between. And when we say talking with politicians, I think that just brings up getting to sit in front of the big important president or the senator or whoever the bullshit is. But there are a lot of local, as you're saying, Phil, a lot of local individuals who you can go speak with, and they don't even necessarily have to be in your district. And you don't necessarily have to coordinate and organize individuals to have a conversation with someone in your district. You can coordinate them because they're in a district that is, susceptible to change. And for sure, it's not the right thing to do to rely on politicians to make number go up. But the incentives are aligned for the politicians, and it seems to be the case that if you give people access to information about what Bitcoin is and how it works, it changes them internally in a significant way. And we could probably all recognize that in ourselves, maybe not. But I guess that's what I wanted to say, act local, behave local, and it's not a 0 to 1 getting from here to a solution to our situation. There's going to be...
It's gradually then suddenly, man. And
it is gradual.
The fact that Ted Cruz and all of them actually wrote that amendment to be passed, that only happened because plebs fucking called or emailed their local senator's office or whatever in their jurisdiction. I mean, from what I heard, and sure, I didn't verify this. I trusted, but from what I heard in that Spaces group, on that panel of the people that sat down with Ted Cruz and others that are involved in government, from what I heard, they actually do respond, and they're actually shocked. I'm sure they're shocked that Muslims actually care about this shit.
They had somebody in Ted Cruz's office. That was crucial.
Well, they had a Zoom meeting of 12 of them, but it was CJ Wilson and Becca, Emily, and people from Unchained Capital like Parker Lewis and Will Cole, and people that this one guy actually helped the Ron Paul campaign, and he had the connection to Ted Cruz in the first place. But granted, they sat down for an hour and explained Bitcoin and like what they thought and why it would be beneficial. And again, it's all about building that voter block. Giving, like, I didn't want to fucking vote for Ted Cruz, years ago, because I'm like, okay, what the fuck are you going to do for me? Now I have a reason. And he understands it. He understands, like, he studied Austrian economics, like, he knows all the Mises shit, and he might be a fucking, like, boob when it comes to getting stuff done. That's just what I've heard. And the whole, like, vote your conscience thing, like, yeah, he's just kind of like a boob, like a sad politician, and everyone just likes to make fun of. But, when you can actually get something like Bitcoin that can change people's incentives, and I don't know, I just think the lobbying thing works for Bitcoin.
You're talking about a guy that sent people's kids to die in the Middle East.
It's the only time that I think that using Bitcoin as a political tool amongst many other tools is the only time that I actually see it working in politics.
I think
for the people's favor.
I think the power dynamics of that are backwards, and I think the ethics are backwards. And I think the first thing I would say, though, is that everybody you mentioned, just to be clear, I think are absolutely rock solid Bitcoiners and wonderful, wonderful humans that I have no issue with at all. Like, I think they're just, all those Unchained guys, they're all fantastic. Huge fan. And on top of that, I do think it's still absolutely terrible strategy from a pragmatic perspective. I think the core issue is that the power dynamics totally backwards. It's assuming that they are in a position of authority that doesn't exist. And I'm not talking about, philosophical anarchist type ideas. I'm talking about in reality, day-to-day life. This position of authority does not exist. And like the example that I like to use is, like, let's say somebody today, September 2021, they have 100 Bitcoin. They're loaded. They're good to go. The state does not matter. They don't need to know Ted Cruz's name. They don't need to know Elizabeth Warren's name. It's done. It's over. They're out. They've got 3 passports. They're good to go. The state does not matter to their day-to-day life, period. That number at the end of this decade is probably going to be, 10 million sats, 15 million sats. I mean, it's like the number of people that achieve that level of economic empowerment is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. And that's what changes the narrative. That's what changes the game. Not pretending like these literal terrorists. But it's like pretending like these literal terrorists have a valid perspective. That's what, like Ted Cruz, okay, maybe he's a little bit more enlightened on Bitcoin. He voted to have people's kids murdered. I mean, that's the reality. And it's like involving ourselves with these people, like, I think the ethics are terrible. But on top of that, I think it's just pragmatically terrible, because it's like, that's not where the power is. These people are residing, they're controlling a pile of ashes, and they're controlling the old broken ass system that is becoming more and more relevant every day. Like we were talking about earlier, the cathedral is burning in a literal inferno, and we have the opportunity to watch it and throw a little gasoline on the fire to help it along. And that's the focus.
Yeah. That's really exciting.
Yeah, they're at us, but ours don't.
I mean, but that's a tiny piece of it, though. I think mostly it's terrible strategy for all the goals. And that's the big difference is, I would have the same goals, I would think, as you guys and whoever else you mentioned that goes and talk to politicians. We probably have largely the same goals, which is hyper-Bitcoinization and eliminating the state. And that's my main opposition to it, is that I think it's terrible strategy in service of those goals. I think it's terrible strategy to lend these people legitimacy and to pretend like they matter and to pretend like they're relevant.
Yeah.
And that's I think the main thing. But but on top of that, I definitely do think they're literal terrorists who can burn in hell.
But okay, right? Like what the state does, yes, they corrupt people, but I don't think they're all terrorists. They just ended up there, and they probably see the inside and they regret it. But the difference,
I'll go 25%.
People that have like their favorite politicians or whatever, if they have their favorite politicians orange pilled, then how is it that they don't get more utility based off?
Well,
I feel like that is a positive for Bitcoin. You want people that aren't vote for policies that declare deal with the whole Bitcoin terrorism. And I know that's only a short-term thing, but it's these. I am gonna live a short life. I'm not gonna live till 2140, and I want this to be as painless for me in my lifetime as possible. And you might think that's not high time preference bullshit, but excuse me, I like to live and not be deemed a terrorist.
Yeah, that's not my opposition. That's not my opposition. My opposition is that we totally agree, I think, on the goals, at least the important ones, short-term and long-term. And I think it's bad strategy of those goals that we, or maybe it's somewhere in the middle. That's the opposition, is that I think we most on the goals. Like, I would pretty much near complete alignment on what short, medium, and long term. And I take the view that strategy. I don't consider you high time preference. Like, that's definitely not critique at all. And yeah, it's just I think it's that power dynamic totally wrong. Like, yeah, like he did when enough.
Like, the power dynamic is that this is being a grassroots effort. People, like everyday people that just happen to own Bitcoin, are able to talk directly to their rep in their district and for the rest of the nation. So I don't know why that's not like the net gain. The short.
Well, it's because you structure that because of fiat money, fiat idea, and I think that people are directly incentivized to not. Ted Cruz is ever actually truly going to be orange. Like, he might opportunity. It's kind of this idea of like, are we going to dilute our message to go and try and get mass adoption from the masses? And I don't think that's the solution.
No, mass adoption doesn't need to be the thing. It's just how much are we willing to tolerate living shitty lives because we happen to be Bitcoiners?
Well, I don't.
And we can actually make change.
But you're taking the view that involving ourselves in politicians is additive to that or helps.
Yeah.
And I'm taking the view that it absolutely is not.
Like, getting politicians that understand Bitcoin.
Because what helps is individuals building economic empowerment.
Could probably reverse some of the central bank digital cuckbuck shit. Potentially. It might not. The World Economic Forum people, globalists, probably have that on lock and have their agenda. But hey, maybe some like individual state sovereignty, like in Texas or Arizona or wherever the fuck, maybe your local representatives can actually get Bitcoin, understand it, and actually flex your 10th Amendment.
See, and I guess like what I would say, and the reason I bring up the ethics part of it is to really crystallize who these people are. And I know I smiled, but I was totally serious. I could go as low as 95% for
but it's
politicians.
Not like all of them.
But it's okay. Let me ask a different question. Like, who has more of a capacity to orange pill people in a meaningful way? Like Michael Saylor or Ted Cruz or Joe Biden, or name your politician, name all of Congress, all of Senate. Like, for all the things I have, all the issues I have with Michael Saylor, I think he has.
There's a game theoretic piece too, and that would be like, are you more influenced by seeing Michael Saylor buy Bitcoin or seeing Joe Biden buy Bitcoin as a non-owner? I think that there's a question to be asked there. I agree with your point, Tucson, that there is an ethical dilemma, but you used the word pragmatism earlier, and as I understand, that means to like make do with what you've got. It doesn't mean to make do with what you got, but you could say it in a make do with what you've got sort of way. Like, pragmatically, we would like to immediately invoke the 10th Amendment to rid ourselves of the federal government. And unfortunately, that we just can't do that. Like that would be a great ideal or like an ideal situation, but in fact, we have to work within the system that we have. And if like in a software sense, and I'll mute here in a moment. In a software sense, we often have the opportunity to write from scratch or to work with the systems that are in place. And we are left with TCP/IP instead of Urbit because we work within the systems that we have already. Because as it turns out, historically, it's been really hard to build new systems from scratch as compared to like modifying and adjusting and adapting the systems that we have.
Not to say that we're not going to do that with Bitcoin, because we are. Sorry, just wanted to jump in and say that.
But I think that's a good point, because I think that's the crucial difference. And there was, on a past account, I got a tweet that made it onto RHR, basically asking the question, are we, and then this was right after the Sailor, Marty, and that, kind of contentious interview. And the question I asked, which I think is the core of the disagreement. And like I said, like we just happen to be on different sides of the issue, which is totally fine. That doesn't bother me at all. But I think the core disagreement is, are we, adapting and redeeming the existing system, or are we building a completely parallel system which people are free to opt into or not? And we're
building a parallel system.
See, I'm 100% in the parallel system camp, which is why we disagree.
More pleasurable if we can change the rules and the infrastructure that we're being coerced into living in at this time. And this is what Rothbard tried to do. Rothbard tried to approach it.
I think
Rothbard didn't have Bitcoin.
See, and I think the tyranny ends. Like I was saying earlier, the tyranny ends when enough individuals accumulate enough economic power. The tyranny ends when people opt into this parallel system and not a second before. And I think all these. I'll just say one more thing.
Is your suggestion that the individuals will be able to opt into this secondary system or parallel system in what way, right? Are they opting in using their 401k and Roth IRA, which is set up like maybe streamlined in some way from where it is now through the increased like legislative moves that happen as a result of onboarding politicians? Are these politicians able to onboard themselves to this parallel system and facilitate the onboarding of others? Like there are a lot of ways that it could go. I agree with your point that ethically, especially the 300 or so congresspersons and 100 senators they're terrible in a lot of different ways, and they voted for the murder of children. Absolutely. And also there's a lot of people in their offices who are of sound like ethical principle and also just believe like we would probably say the wrong things, or don't have a full understanding and haven't had their third eyes peeled open by, the Bitcoin psychedelic. But where do we draw the line at individuals who can participate in Bitcoin in an ethical way and be considered kind of like valid participants in the network? Like, where do we draw the line at who we talk to?
I think ultimately it's people that are like the people I'm interested in interacting with are people that are actually willing to create change and start building this parallel system. So like specifically, I think a good point in history to kind of look to as a major upheaval due to technology would be the Protestant Revolution. And ultimately the government the church had a monopoly on information via the printing or via being the only people that were literate, and the people that came along and challenged that were people printing and translating Bibles into different languages. And I don't think it was going and lobbying the church
Weren't those individuals members of the church?
Well, they were individuals that had their own beliefs in God, but that was like a very heretical.
Were they outside of the confines of like this imaginary perimeter of like the church, who has the power and control over the dictates of what God says to the individuals?
Yeah, ultimately they were, because if you look at like Martin Luther, he was excommunicated from the church. So yeah, yes, they, essentially were, and the people were, going and taking action that could potentially get them burned at the stake with where the the power structures lied, with the church having this monopoly over society. And I think it's similar today, with government. If we really were orange pilling Ted Cruz, he would immediately resign. I
That's
think
fair.
ultimately.
That's fair.
And so that's the way it really interesting with it's not the masses, and I think it's going in like, I do engage in politics to a certain extent, like in being involved with the Libertarian Party, but my goal ultimately isn't to go and try and get this person elected to make my life a little bit easier. It's to use this technology, which is Bitcoin, and orange pill these people, and bring them into my circle of people that I can rely on and take some meaningful action today. But I don't like the idea of like, relying on these individuals that are a part of a system that's built to victimize people as a solution.
Yeah, relying on them, I think, is a really important thing to avoid, and like giving ourselves as many options as possible while protecting our ethical boundaries is maybe an ideal to strive for, right? And if we can, maybe Sailor is orange pilled. Maybe he's just an incredibly greedy son of a bitch, and the same could be true about Cruz as a for instance. Do we, are we willing to totally write these individuals off in order to maintain some presumed ideological purity, or can we like lean on Bitcoin and lean on the network of plebs to maintain the purity of Bitcoin while also coming face to face with these individuals?
That's my core point, though. My core point is not ideological purity. My core point is pragmatism. I think it's very bad strategy, and I think it diverts us away from what actually moves the needle, which is individuals accumulating economic power and people building out and opting into a parallel system. Like, I think that's what builds the needle, and anything we do that diverges away from that, I think, is pragmatically, in the short term, medium term, and long term, is very bad strategy.
So is it not pragmatic to sit down with a politician that will actually give you the time of day to listen to what you have to say and try to actually make legislation pass that will make your life easier and make you more economically free?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's really interesting.
Can I just have that addressed? I'm sorry, Henry.
I feel
I just want to get closure on that.
What was the question again?
Is it worth sitting down with a politician
Never
that
mind.
gives you attention to pass legislation?
Yeah, see, I think that's what we've been talking about. No, I don't think it is. I think it's a diversion away from what I think treating politicians as something other than an individual that can potentially be redeemed by Bitcoin is what I think is misguided. And that's my point with the Sierra Vista meetup is, we're not going down there to end the military industrial or even influence in any way whatsoever. Not $1 will be diverted away from the military industrial complex because of doing that meetup. But individuals can be saved, and individuals can be, can see the light at the end of the tunnel opened up to them. And I have no desire to control anybody else. If somebody wants to go talk to Ted Cruz, go talk to Ted Cruz. I can tell you I think it's bad strategy, and you can tell me I'm a dumb idiot, and that's great. We can shake hands and have a beer. It's not a problem. But yeah, I'm just trying to crystallize, I think, why we're on different sides of that debate, which again is 100% fine. Like, we agree on Bitcoin. Like, all this other stuff is just, a bunch of little random shit around the edges.
I also agree that, Bitcoin is going to take off and do what it has to do, and everyone's going to be free. But, if we can somehow make it easier on people on the way up there, I think that's cool too.
Yeah, and that's just where we disagree. I don't think it makes it easier.
I think regardless.
Hold on. Look at the cryptography wars. That was political activism.
and writing the cryptography shit on the shirts, and Phil Zimmerman standing up in front of court and making cryptography like in the public domain. Like that was political action, was it not?
I don't think so. I don't think political action. I mean, that Timothy May was the number one guy. I mean, he came up with the phrase of, we're not setting up card tables where.
Yeah, no, I love Tim May. Like that, the documentary that Reason did, he basically said, "Fuck you." So what? Deal with it. Like I love that, but also the whole like fighting for cryptography to like not be a munition. It kind of took both sides in a way, because they made the T-shirts and they stood for Congress, whatever. Like at the end of the day, like it actually worked. And so, I think like both strategies, like the Tim May strategy is ultimately going to win, like regardless, but still like both help. You kind of have a long-term situation, and then you have like a short, medium-term tool as well.
Yeah, and I guess for me that's a really strong parallel to Bitcoin, because they capitulated because they were powerless in the face of it, in the face of cryptography.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same dynamic with Bitcoin, which is why I think that a lot of people that involve themselves in politics have the power dynamic wrong. That these, I don't know. I guess I just keep going back to that guy that's got a fuck ton of Bitcoin. I mean, he's out. He's done. He's good to go. He can do whatever he wants. And it's like getting more people to that place I think is how we succeed, not any kind of involvement with the existing structure. And that's why I pragmatically, from a strategy perspective, think it's misguided, because
I think you're making, Tucson, it's really interesting to hear what you're saying, but I find myself agreeing with Phil. I think, Tucson, that you're making 3 or 4 different arguments, and I think half of them aren't consistent with the other half. You've said, as I've listened to you, that in your local district, you feel it's futile. I'm not quoting you, but you said something to the effect that it's futile to make an effort for political change locally where you live because it's all Democrat, and you feel like that's just, the numbers indicate that trying to swing an election to a new candidate wouldn't be worthwhile because it's not going to succeed, because it's just too many people are already thinking the opposite way. So that's a very different argument than what you've repeatedly said, which is that you don't want to dignify the political process, which is very different than saying it's futile to try to do that. And you've also talked about, so there's a conflict there. I feel like there are other conflicts in what you're saying. You talk about pragmatics again and again, but then you also talk about not dignifying the political machine because our current political establishment supports, war and other things that you said Ted Cruz is like for like murdering or torturing. So I think that you're making like conflicting arguments. I feel like you can't talk about pragmatics and then talk about like ideologically being like too pure to like want to get involved with politicians. So, and also the most convincing reason I think to like care about politics is that life is inherently political. We find this in like Aristotle's writings. You can't live without being political. Politics is part of like society.
I actually used that quote earlier. Like he said, like, those who choose to not participate in politics are ruled by the politicians.
I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
A practical way of just wrapping this point about politics up is that, wrapping what I'm trying to say up is that, like, if we get, 20, 30, like, Bitcoin positive senators, eventually like 50 or more, like, then the establishment has become pro-Bitcoin. I feel like caring about the technology is a great thing to care about, and it's great that some people focus on that. But what you're saying, Tucson, is that you actually think you said the phrase bad strategy, which suggests it's either counterproductive or unethical, which would be consistent with what the other points you're making, that it's like futile or, dealing with impure people. So I just feel like your line of reasoning to have more merit needs to be like more integrated. Like your statements should all make sense as a whole. It shouldn't be like different fragments that are kind of opposing each other.
Well, yeah, okay. We're two separate people arguing different points, I think, which might be a part of it. But yeah, I was arguing that it wasn't really pragmatic to go and try and like influence things from a local politics standpoint in Tucson, and why it's more pragmatic to take the approach that, you know, we're both arguing.
And I think, and so the reason, and that my core thing is, I think it's pragmatically bad strategy, and I don't know you, but I would guess that we probably agree on the goals. I think we probably have roughly the same goals for what success with Bitcoin looks like in the short, medium, and long term, which is, you know, hyper Bitcoinization, you know, watch the ability for the state to accumulate power and resources, trend to zero as quickly as possible, you know, all these things that are important. And I think that, and this is why I think it's pragmatically bad strategy. Like, to me, the ethics is just the cherry on top. Like, the main reason it's a bad idea is because it diverts us away from what actually creates meaningful change, which is individuals becoming economically empowered. And I think that the way that we do it is by influencing and connecting with as many individuals as possible and building it out from there, and not wasting time, energy, and resources on these people that just don't matter. And like I said, again, this you know, I'm somebody whose fiat income goes to zero. You know, I'm driving Uber if Bitcoin gets outlawed. I mean, that's just, well, maybe not Uber. I could probably do other tech stuff, but like my fiat income goes to zero. You know, I'm not gonna say where I work, but you know, it's tied to Bitcoin directly. It's a Bitcoin company, and so it's like I'm very, very heavily incentivized in the short term to be concerned with what these people are up to. You know, like, I'm not that guy that's out there Bitcoin retired who, you know, just doesn't give a fuck about any of this and doesn't have to. But like, I think, and I actually, the main reason I bring up the kind of the ethics and the principles part of it, and, you know, calling them terrorists and things like that, is because I think it crystallizes who we're dealing with. I think it crystallizes, you know, for somebody to be involved in this kind of stuff, like, I don't care if they're a good dad. I don't care if they're a good husband. Like, you know, if you're involved in fundamentally evil and corrupt shit, and again, this is only on the principle side, this is not on the pragmatic side at all, obviously.
Why does it make sense for you to say that politics doesn't matter, and then to say that it would ruin your income flow if Bitcoin were outlawed? Those two statements are in direct conflict, aren't they? Not.
They're not at all, because my short-term income is not what I'm concerned about.
Easier to live with. If you can make your life easier to live with, why would you not choose that option? And this isn't the path of least resistance. That's just being pragmatic. You're using the tools at your advantage, and you have this opportunity, once in a lifetime opportunity, where these people, some of them and more will come, will actually give you the fucking time of day to sit down and actually talk about this stuff.
But that's our core disagreement, though. You guys take the view that this stuff has, you know, net positive effects in the short and medium term, and I don't see evidence for that. You know, there could be something I'm missing. I don't see evidence for that. I think what has positive net effects in the short and medium term is individuals accumulating economic power, like those things. And so what am I focused on? I'm focused on me accumulating as much economic power as possible. I'm focused on building out uncensorable, you know, sources of income. I'm focused on, you know, like I said, my fiat income. I didn't say all my income. And, you know, that's, to me, like, that's what moves the needle. And it's like, I just, you know, and again, to be absolutely clear, like, this is not something that, you know, I think is even worth getting upset about. It's just, you know, a difference of opinion on, you know, an ancillary issue. But I do appreciate, no, I know, but I'm just clarifying my perspective that I really appreciate the engagement and the ideas and the questions and all that stuff. Like, that was my only point there, was that I appreciate you guys. That's all.
Oh, well, thanks, man. No, like, my whole thing is, like, you know, what me and I guess Henry and the Pope over here, what we're trying to say is, like, this is the most pragmatic solution. If we were able to, like, mold the shit around us to make our lives easier for us and our families as we grow, because we want to live in abundance, and we want to do that if that opportunity is there. And it's just stupid and uneconomic, arguably, if there is a better solution, to not take advantage of it. Like, if you are trying to catch fish with a spear instead of using a fucking fishing lure, or, you know, try to catch fish with your hands instead of, like, building a net, why would you keep catching fish with your hands? Or same with, like, open source software. You know, it's like the definition of insanity. There is an opportunity. Granted, we haven't seen anything come to fruition yet. We still have to wait and see how this all plays out and what these so-called good politicians that will work in our favor will do for us. But still, I think it's worth the chance to at least try.
Yeah, and I don't, which is totally fine. Like, we can each take our own approach.
Yeah, I think like the big thing is, and I'm totally on board with Skeef's side of this argument, but I think we both disagree on the idea that it is the path of least resistance, or it's even a productive activity to go about that. But yeah.
Hey guys, I have a comment. If I could take a turn.
Go for it.
Yeah, like I think about it, like, you know, if this was a war, like Bitcoin versus the state, then, you know, at least from a theoretical standpoint, if you could get inside the state and turn a bunch of their agents against them into double agents, who, I mean, and the idea is that you weaken the resolve of the state by infiltrating it with spies and, you know, double agents, etc. Then essentially what it does is it makes the war so much more easily winnable, you know. And it's like, do you want to win like on a full frontal assault where you just like stay very principled and you say, you know, it's us versus you, and since you philosophically don't understand that or don't agree with us, then we're at war with you. I mean, I think you win.
That's what the Republicans are doing right now.
Yeah, but I mean,
or have been for years.
Yeah, my point is though, like, if Bitcoin can infiltrate and we can get political, you know, like at least a decrease in resistance against Bitcoin, where the state just can't attack it because they can't mount the political will, because essentially we've infiltrated them, then they just lose, you know, with a whimper, and the war's over. So I mean, my thought is like, yeah, can we bum rush the state fast enough? Can we infiltrate it enough that essentially you flip the political structure where it's not able to fight it, because essentially they're on board. They've deserted, and they've joined our team, and so then they just all raise the white flag, and it's just a quicker, easier, more winnable war if you can infiltrate the enemy. Is I guess my thought on it.
I would argue your perspective is the frontal assault, and mine is the guerrilla warfare, grassroots approach, because it's like I don't like, you know, from that perspective, there's really two sides. There's the state, and then there's Bitcoin, and you know, the perspective I take is that there are billions of individuals, and you know, at the end of the day, you know, at least what I'm about is not even necessarily hyper-Bitcoinization, but it's human flourishing and prosperity. I just happen to think that hyper-Bitcoinization is the most likely way to achieve success in that area. And yeah, I mean, to me, it's like, you know, it could be a billion different people fighting a billion different wars. But it's, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, that was just something that popped in my head.
Do you think they're mutually exclusive, or like you could have all strategies operating at once? That's kind of the other point that's I think been made, where it's like, I mean, it's not like one strategy is performed to the exclusion of the other necessarily. Like I get your point. Like, it's about focus and resources, and so it's like what gets you the biggest bang for the buck. But it seems like, I mean, I've got time to be shit posting on Twitter, talking to my friends, and then maybe even like contacting my senator. And so it's not like, I mean, I don't have infinite time, but I've got enough time where I can do kind of all of them at once. And, you know, I can weaken the state at the same time that I'm strengthening my friends, at the same time that I'm going to my fiat job and converting fiat to Bitcoin. Like, I'm doing all of them at once. It's not like you have to choose a strategy, right?
Yeah. And like I said, I have no, very, very, very close friends of mine, are, calling their senators, calling their congressmen. Like I'm totally fine with people taking different approaches. My thing is I'm saying like, this is how I'm going to allocate my time and my energy. And here's why I think it's the appropriate, way. And, people can agree or disagree with that. But it's like, to your specific example, my personal view is that, you would do more for human flourishing by cutting your neighbor's grass and using that $30 to buy Bitcoin I don't know. I haven't cut grass in a while, but I live in the desert.
You can cut my grass.
But, it's like, I think that, I think that would do more to accomplish our goals than getting on the phone with a politician. And if people disagree with that, that's totally fine. Then they can call the politician and I'll go cut grass or whatever the equivalent
You
is.
guys live in a desert. You don't even have grass.
Yeah,
I've got a lot of grass. It's not like your typical grass. It's more like wild desert grass. But it's been a very rainy year.
All right, I'll go rake the rocks in my neighbor's front yard. How about that?
Yeah.
Tucson, is it reasonable for someone who disagrees with the position that you take and wants to like get you onto their platform to even address those arguments that you're making and like without questioning the validity of them? Like, do you have any amount of flexibility in that assertion that it's entirely like not the right approach to engage with politics?
I mean, so this is, yeah. And sorry, and again, part of the thing that's kind of confusing is there's two of us. But this is, so Skeef, I take the approach that, just that no, I personally, I don't see any point in allocating time and energy to that, but again, if somebody else wants to, or if somebody wants to, have a conversation with me and, and tell me why they think I'm wrong about that, that's something I'm 100% open to, not opposed to. And
maybe the kind of question that he was trying to ask is like, you say it's like you personally don't feel it's worthwhile or productive, but you made other statements like politicians are generally like evil people, in terms of what they do. Even if they're good family people, they're like, in favor of war. And then you also talked about, as I mentioned earlier, like locally for you, it looks unviable to be political. So if someone else is in an area where like it looks like there's a very close election coming up and there's some Bitcoiner running and someone else is running against them, and if you went door to door and convinced like 50 people in your town, then like the whole area would flip for like the Bitcoiner to be elected, and then there's one more person in Congress like voting the way you like. So it sounds like, and then you said a point about like cutting grass is better than talking to any politician. So you seem to me, I could be wrong totally, but based on what I'm hearing, it seems like you vacillate between saying it is ethically wrong to associate with politicians, and then you say it's like sometimes unviable to try to flip political campaigns, and then you say you just don't feel like it, and it's a personal decision, as if we were just choosing flavors of ice cream, and there's no objective ethical, course of action. Like you could just do whatever you feel like. So which is it? Like I don't detect a coherent like line of reasoning on this question of should Bitcoiners care about politics? Because to me, it seems obvious, in my personal opinion, that politics matters a lot. And we could either go through a prohibition era that is decades long, where Bitcoin is suppressed by the government and no one is allowed to transact with any company with their Bitcoin, and it's like just used by like a limited number of people who are just like secretly hodling, or it could be like publicly legal as it currently is by and large to like use it and adopt it. And that has a great effect on people's lives, as you have discussed yourself, whether you have like a Bitcoin podcast, you have an income stream related to Bitcoin, and the whole thing were shut down. And if it were illegal to even talk about Bitcoin and promote it, then you would have to go drive Uber. So it would affect your life and it would affect Bitcoin adoption, and it would set everything back a lot if the political efforts that are in favor of Bitcoin were abandoned in the name of like not associating with politicians or in the name of just like not caring about it. Like I get what you're saying about how the printing press revolutionized society and weakened central authorities. You know, I read The Sovereign Individual too, but I think that in the case of Bitcoin, it's clear that like this kind of technology can either be legal or not legal, and that'll have a great effect on its adoption rate in our generation. So I think it's like excellent that some people care about that, and it's perfectly fine that others don't. But the argument you seem to be making is that there's like a universal ethical claim on like whether it's good to do that or not, and you're also saying it's bad strategy, which is not so much ethical as like technical in nature when you say bad strategy. So you're using like normative terms and then non-normative terms to describe it. I'm curious to know like what is the best coherent line of reasoning in that.
So totally. So in my view, those are two totally separate objections to this strategy. That there's a pragmatic objection that it doesn't work, and then there's an ethical objection, which is that these people send kids to get murdered in the Middle East. And to me, those are two totally separate things. And I don't view one as being terribly related, very closely related to the other. And I think I bring up the power dynamic thing because I think that's our core disagreement. And I think it was really, and like I said, it's this, anyway, I just think that's our core disagreement. And I think it was really kind of made clear in that comment because the scenario that you're describing, I don't think is an option on the table. For them. Like I think you have a completely different view of the power dynamic than I do, which is totally fine. Like, you said, it could be decades of tyranny and oppression. I don't think they have that power. And I think the evidence is that they are absolutely, have been losing, just completely flying out of control for several years now, probably a lot longer than that. And that we've already seen the absolute height of state power in all of human history, and that their ability to accumulate power and resources is rapidly trending towards zero. And the number one way that we can expedite that is by individuals accumulating economic power. But it's like, to your core question, like I view the pragmatic argument as totally separate from the ethical argument. And, but because I have those ethical views, that's certainly my bias. That's my blind spot. That's where I come from, is that I have deep hatred for these people. No question. So that's my bias.
I got a comment about like the local politics angle. Like if I think about it like, okay, let's say I am a Republican, not. I lived in Brad Sherman. I assume just always goes Democrat. If I can help this Erica Rhodes pro-Bitcoiner get elected, which I think if she does get elected, I think she'll know exactly how she got elected. Like it's going to be because this giant internet movement about Bitcoin got behind her and it happened. And so like a situation like that, you could like as a Republican, well, there's a couple of different like pragmatic options. One is to like change your political affiliation and vote in the primary, but you could also go out and campaign for her. And then, if we win something like that, that's like a giant, that's killing your enemies, one of their big generals. It's like
it's essentially doing what Obama did with social media during his campaigns, but better because there's money and people like money.
Yeah. But it sends a giant message to them that like again, it does change the morale on the battlefield about who's winning and which way the momentum is going. And also like, where's the Overton window? Like so it looks like politically, like, politicians are Bitcoiners and like, that's a normal thing now. And to be anti-Bitcoin is pretty much like the people don't like that. And so it sends all kinds of messages socially. If we can win those types of local battles, and there are ways to do it, even if you're not like, even if your options aren't great. Like if I was a Republican in that district, I probably wouldn't be too happy about her general politics, but I would be happy about what it does from a Bitcoin standpoint.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I take a lot of inspiration from what Mike Peterson's done in El Zante, El Salvador. And so essentially what he did was a few years ago, he went down there and started working, with a few kids, paying them in Bitcoin to try and keep them out of gangs. And they went and put pressure on their local merchants to start accepting Bitcoin. And it kind of had this ripple effect and led eventually to, the country making a decision because of what Bitcoin was doing, for a small minority of people. And I think that's how, we change these things, ultimately. And I agree with Skeef that their ability to accumulate wealth is going to diminish and is diminishing quite a bit. But, the stakes are pretty high here, ultimately. A lot of us are doing this because of self-preservation. And, regardless of whether they make it legal or illegal, this is a global currency, and, this is almost, somewhat of a U.S.-centric conversation, because if they make it illegal here, there's a lot of countries around the world that have a tremendous amount to benefit from it, and that's not totally out of the options of going to those places as a, action of self-preservation. But, I see it as an inevitability of what's happening here, and I almost wonder if they were to come out and they were going to pass, very draconian legislation, if that would almost increase the adoption.
Yeah.
Because
I think it would.
Yeah. It would. I mean, you just look at like what China did.
Nigeria.
Should we have been lobbying the CCP to, keep mining in China? I don't think so.
Yeah. That's it. Let's say it gets shut down at the federal level in the U.S. That just means it grows in other parts of the world, which I think would be a, massive net positive. It's like I want to see the end of the American empire as soon as possible, and so if our federal government cracks down and has this big huge crackdown, suddenly Cash App is illegal, River Financial is illegal, blah blah blah. That activity is going to go somewhere else, and wherever that goes to, it's going to be the place.
Steve, I fucking live here, dude. I don't want to have to deal with that shit.
Yeah, life's hard. Like I said, I've got a ton at stake at this. Like I'm advocating. I was gonna say I'm advocating something that hurt, but no, I think what I'm advocating is the best strategy for me personally as well, even given what I mentioned earlier. But I mean, we're involved in a project that was created because of state censorship. Like this idea that we're going to get out of this without an incredible amount of state censorship, I think is incredibly naive. Yeah. And I think it really, really weakens our position, which is why I think it's bad strategy, which again is totally separate from the ethical moral argument. Two things from the YouTube chat real quick. Zorn's kid is a winner. He said, my son mowed lawns. Sorry, I'm blind as fuck. Mowed lawns this summer. He took the money he earned and put it in BTC. And then comment from Don. When BTC influence is large enough to, and this I think is a really key point. I like the way Don phrased this. He says, when BTC influence is large enough to significantly influence politics, it will be because of the amount accumulated by individuals, not because we called our politicians. And I would agree with that. I do like that phrasing.
And I think we also need to have a conversation about, are we going to comply, with these measures when they eventually come? Because we are worried about self-preservation right now, and we're looking at things like the vax mandates. Like, what's more effective, calling our politician and telling them that we don't like vax mandates, or, making a consistent effort to proof yourself from their ability to reach into your life and destroy it, and, being non-compliant? Like, I think the state hates us. I think the state is at war with us. Their intent is to confiscate as much as they can from us, and it's not about, whether...
The state seems to be comprised of individual actors. There is not a singular state. And I think that there is an emergent phenomenon which we witness, just to talk about my own shit for a second. I think that we live on this planet as humans in the presence of metacognitive entities, right? FedEx is an animal that eats gasoline and shits boxes on doorsteps. And each state is comprised of a number of individuals who act as, cellular automata and perform these functions of the state and do the thing. But there are individual actors within it, and if we can control the behavior of those individual actors or influence the behavior of those individual actors, we influence the outcome of the behavior of the larger animal. And so, and to your points, Tucson, I fully agree with you that, the state is out to get us. It is objectively and apparently evil and has, in the way that things work right now, there is the behavior of that metacognitive organism, and you can see where it's going, you can see what it does. But I think that we do have the ability to influence, and I'm not trying to convince you to change your preferences about how you spend and optimize your time, but I would also encourage the support of other individuals in your neighborhood who are working to influence the state system, despite the fact that direct action is a faster course towards, or a faster pathway towards solving these problems. I think that getting all individuals involved in direct action in the way that would be necessary to achieve the objectives that we would all agree are the ideal objectives, I think we're going to have better luck with more participants. And if we can get some participation by the state organism, then the state organism will behave differently in ways that favor a time schedule closer to making us all rich in our short lives in a way that we can enjoy them. I gotta bounce, guys, because I'm gonna go have some dinner.
Thanks for joining us, Pope.
Yep. Have a good dinner.
Yeah, likewise, man. Or whatever. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think it's about the amount of people that we have involved in it. I think the masses actually put Bitcoin at more of a, risky place, because if everybody has all their, Bitcoin centralized on exchanges, that doesn't make them any more powerful in their lives, other than, the number going up a little bit, but that's at the mercy of the government and, the regulator telling, giving this exchange permission to operate and, choosing for whatever reason to not confiscate those funds. Where I think, the power comes from is the small and tolerant minority that is self-custodying it, using privacy practices, and, really stepping into a sovereign lifestyle. I think those are the powerful individuals in this circumstance. And, I kind of see the parallels of, the Revolutionary Wars. Should we have lobbied King George harder, to give us a little bit more freedom? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think your point there about, should we have lobbied the CCP is a good one to continue to examine. I don't disagree with it. It may not have done us any good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
all right, I gotta bounce. Thank you, guys.
They're more objectively evil on their face. More in-your-face evil. But
one example, I don't know if this is a good parallel or not, but at least personally, I think of it a lot in the same way that I think about public education. So I, despise public schools, school districts, school boards, all that kind of stuff. So I homeschool my kids. So my kids are homeschooled. They just don't go to public school. They're out of it. And I try to, help and assist other people in understanding why that's so important, so that they can homeschool their kids too, so that their kids can get out, so that their kids aren't, walking around with these face diapers and having, some person tell them what to do because they went to education school for 4 years at some university that is just completely overrun by communists or whatever. I mean, it's just actually, I was talking about this a few days ago, and I said, basically that I thought that the education departments at all universities could burn to the ground, and that would be a net positive for children's development. And I don't know. I do definitely think that's true. But it's that's the analogy that it's I I want my kids to be protected from this. I want them to be separate, so they're homeschooled. It's like that's what actually has a meaningful effect. And what we're seeing now is, the numbers for homeschool are just going absolutely through the roof because people don't want their kids walking around in these face diapers and all this other nonsense that comes with it. Critical race theory, whatever. And that I think that's the parallel. Not, and the lesson to learn from that is that the way that we succeed on that issue is by as many people as possible homeschooling as many kids as possible, and not by trying to pretend. And that's even at a local level. Like a school board is way easier to influence than the United States Congress. And I still think the strategy holds.
There's one I want to ask for a point of clarification. I feel like we talked a little bit about the possibility of like a unfortunate draconian political period of prohibition with respect to Bitcoin. And after that came up, you said it was not going to happen. But then
I think it's functionally impossible.
But then, you said it was impossible or something. But then more recently, just moments ago, you talked about the possibility, and you said that there's like an inevitable great conflict. And like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you basically seem to be saying that like it was inevitable that it would happen.
That we would experience state censorship. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole point of this project.
You're making like, it seems to me that I'm either misunderstanding or you're making conflicting statements about what you predict the future will contain for Bitcoin in terms of whether or not political suppression of Bitcoin will increase or decrease. There's a certain level of suppression right now, right? There has been an increase in compliance mandates, which, at the service provider level, that, reduce innovation and competition and stifle adoption and increase costs, and it's in the name of surveillance and, compliance. So that burden could go up, it could go down, and it could go up towards, greater levels of like control and suppression. They could ban all private wallets, for example, like you talked about self-custody just a minute ago. So is it impossible or is it inevitable? Which are you saying about like a period of prohibitionism for Bitcoin in the short and medium term, which are terms that you introduced?
So a couple of different things. Like I don't think saying there will be state censorship is like goes with the draconian future that you were talking about. I think would be one thing. I think like the bigger, I don't know, I'm trying to think of another way to phrase it, because I think, I guess I just think, I kind of not to keep beating the same dead horse, but it's like, I think what it goes back to is we have a fundamental disagreement about what, this sort of political activity, about the effects that has in the real world. I think that's what our core disagreement is. And so it's like, if I understand your framing correctly, it's like you're saying that I am, like I'm willing to sacrifice short-term wins in the area of politics, of convincing senators or more favorable laws, or, that basically that I'm willing to sacrifice those things for some other goal. And my position is not that at all. My position is that I don't see any evidence that political activity is beneficial to those goals. Like I don't see evidence that this train is slowing down. I don't. I think they have their foot on the gas and they're headed towards a cliff, and so will they try to? And there's also a very, very just absolutely enormous gulf between the laws that they write and what actually happens in the real world. So could they write a law that says, blue wallet's illegal, you can't self-custody? Of course they could. They could do that tomorrow. But is that the same thing as get rid of? I don't think that has much in common with getting rid of self-custody.
I also think that innovation would be accelerated, right, if there was a draconian
I think the
law.
state, yeah, I think the state would end faster if they went Soviet.
Well, you said that you would have to drive Uber if they banned Bitcoin.
Yeah, that was actually a terrible example because I'm a software developer, so I could find all kinds of different ways to make money.
Well,
but yeah, that's the idea.
So I'm trying to like listen to what you're saying, and and know like what you mean literally and what you don't mean. Like whether the period of prohibitionism is impossible or inevitable, whether your real life, real world lived experience would change or not based on the laws.
Let me try
Seems
one
like
more.
you're saying like are you saying the laws have no effect on the so-called real world? Like you talk about someone who has 100 Bitcoin being set. It's unclear whether you're sort of implying that they have non-KYC Bitcoin and they have no bills to pay that are KYC bills. Like, I'm not sure what exactly you're saying, because I feel like the real world for almost everyone, if not everyone, unless you're living in a cabin alone in the woods, involves interacting with the political sphere. And this notion that I totally agree with about how technological innovation can weaken centralized institutions, like you cited the printing press, I agree with that. I agree that innovation can redistribute and disperse power in society, weakening old institutions and creating healthier, newer ones. But I think that line of reasoning, taken to the extreme where politics just doesn't matter and just it all disappears and there's no more political activity and everyone lives in a fully voluntary society, that's a great vision. And that's the vision that every libertarian has. I love that vision.
And
but
it's available today to that guy with 100 Bitcoin, and it's going to be available to anybody with 10 million sats in 8 or 10 years. That would be the point. But then also, I think probably our core disagreement is, when I say that draconian future is impossible, I'm talking about what's implemented on the, and that I think it's a very good point. That's something that I should clarify, which is what I'm not talking about the laws that get written, because I'm talking about how it gets used on a day-to-day basis. Like people will use, we use Nigeria as an example. Like Bitcoin's been outright banned in Nigeria for a very long, for at least a year or two, I think. And, no banks, can't do anything with it. And what's the result? The Bitcoin price in Nigeria is usually about 15 to 30% higher than it is here. And Bitcoin gets used all over Nigeria. It's just not used with the official banks and things like that. So I think that's the future that we see. It's just like, let's say, they outlaw self-custody, they shut down Cash App, they, I don't know, whatever else that the federal government has influence over. I think that has little to nothing to do, or I think it has absolutely nothing to do with Bitcoin's long-term success. And that I think that on top of that, the reason I think all of this is bad strategy in a pragmatic sense is that I think, you talking to Ted Cruz or, getting together a super PAC or whatever, I think, and again, this is where we can perfectly, be reasonable and disagree because it's in the future and it's untested. My, best guess about how that plays out is that it's completely irrelevant and that a much better allocation of time and resources. And so, would be accumulating Bitcoin.
What I don't understand, though, is that on the one hand, you talk about this person with 100 Bitcoin having like total freedom, and that their actual life, their real life, is not impacted at all by the political sphere because they have 100 Bitcoin. But then you also said to Phil that the people who want to escape suppression, political oppression, could move to other countries, which is a large impact on one's real life, right? If you have to move to El Salvador to live a nice life, that's a very real life, effort that you have to undertake.
If they let you fucking leave in the first place.
It's very, I just feel like your ideas are really interesting, but I don't detect a coherent line of reasoning in your arguments. You say, seems to be that you say one thing, then the opposite. Like, is the period of prohibition for Bitcoin inevitable or impossible? Is the effect of the political sphere nothing when someone has 100 Bitcoin, which in my opinion is sort of an arbitrary number?
See, you think you have influence over that. I think you do not. I think that I think is probably the core. You think
I have influence over what?
Over anything in the political sphere, or that there's some mechanism by which we can affect these processes. Like I don't see evidence for that. And like I said, I'm the first to admit I could be wrong about that, but I I don't see evidence that we as Bitcoiners, as a group or whatever, can make like net positive effects on these kinds of things. And then the reason I bring up the 100 Bitcoin guy is because, you know, my core point there is that this tyranny ends when enough individuals accumulate enough economic power. I don't know what that number is exactly. Today, you know, I just use it for a big round number that's, you know, just a giant massive stack, you know, 100 Bitcoin. Like that person is out. People who don't have that are still fucked and are still at the mercy of whatever's going on. And my core point is that we need as many people as possible to get that to that point of economic empowerment, which, like I said, in 10 years, I think is going to be 10 million sats or whatever. But like, we need as many people as possible to get to that level of economic power, and that's how we succeed, and not by, you know, wasting our time and resources on politics and different things like that.
It's interesting because when you talk about that, what you're saying mathematically is you're saying the distribution of Bitcoin needs to increase on a per person basis. But earlier you talked about how it's not productive when people use, you know, centralized finance. They need to self-custody. So that's another layer of requirement that you should add to your current, you know, position, right? Because like, it's not just distribution, it's also distribution to self-custody. And then thirdly, I think if I understand you correctly, what you mean to say is that it's not just the distribution, it's also the value. Because if the whole world had 10 million sats each, or whatever, you know, 21 million divided by 8 billion is, like if the let's say the dollar value of those 10 million sats is like $2, that wouldn't be so great. You know, what you're envisioning is that each sat is worth like thousands of dollars. So what you really mean is the total market cap of Bitcoin, you know, surpasses like, you know, 100 trillion or something. And then also everyone's doing self-custody. I agree that all of those things would be great. I feel like sort of the cart pushing the horse to think that adoption is all that matters. I think that like it's healthy, and that's why I feel like others have said here that like a political effort is relevant. I mean, you yourself are talking about losing your job and having to change countries if there's a period of prohibitionism, and then you're saying it doesn't matter to people. It just is like,
but that's my point.
Irrelevant.
You think you have influence over that. I think you do not. And I think that's one of our core disagreements, which again is totally fine.
Having a politician be on Bitcoin and people watching and listening and being educated by them isn't good for mass adoption?
See, the way I would frame it is diverting time and energy away from individuals accumulating economic power and toward trying to influence politicians is bad strategy.
But they're accumulating economic power the more people that get educated on Bitcoin. Especially if they do invest time watching bullshit news and they happen to see Ted Cruz or fucking whoever.
Yeah, but those aren't the people that are creating change.
Yeah. And so here's another place that we probably...
Hold on.
But like
those same people would be just as likely to be signing up for UBI.
Who are the fucking people?
So here's another point that we probably disagree.
The people.
The politicians aren't the ones that make change?
So just hold on a second. Here's another point where we probably disagree.
That's my question.
Huh?
Are you saying the politicians are not the ones that make change?
The people watching
yes,
TV
I'm absolutely
and watching
saying politicians are not the ones that make change, without question.
And the people watching Ted Cruz on TV aren't.
Because if they're the ones on TV that millions of people are watching, they get educated and millions of people have that.
They're sitting in a burning cathedral right now. These are not like people negotiating from a position of power.
No, I'm talking about the average Joe watching fucking Fox in the morning.
The average Joe is fucked. Period.
They're not the ones creating change.
Like this is the point I was about to make.
The average Joe's fucked. Where do you get mass adoption then?
I said mass adoption?
You said that mass adoption is going to. You seem to be saying that
I'm saying. I think 3 to 5% is extremely optimistic, personally. To be honest with you, like I don't have any. You know, we've talked about it on this show a couple times before, but it's like I have I take the view that minimum 80% of the population is completely incapable or completely interact with reality in a critical way. And it just is what it is. Like, it doesn't make them bad people. I have no animosity towards them. I have no negative sentiment of any kind towards them. But like, I think, yeah, I just don't think it, I don't think it matters. And yeah,
And yet the same people are dumb enough to go vote.
Okay.
And if the person they're dumb enough to vote for is preaching Bitcoin, first of all, it's going to make economic rational sense for them to
if
go
that
buy
affects
Bitcoin
me, I'm
because
not
their
using Bitcoin
savings
properly.
aren't going to get lost. This is how you create mass adoption. You have
I don't care about
the
mass
dummy
adoption.
politicians influence people, dummy people that will go vote for them to buy Bitcoin because the politician that they idolize fucking said so. That's one way to get mass adoption.
I don't care about mass adoption. I think that's an admirable goal. I think
you don't care about adoption.
No, I think I think as many individuals as possible accumulating economic power is the goal. And I think 3 to 5% of the population doing that in a meaningful way is extremely optimistic.
Okay, why can't those watching the news be part of that 3 to 5%?
I mean, historically, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a word
People
other than
are
retarded.
fucking sheep, and they listen to their leaders on the TV. Hello,
Phil, let's
Bitcoin.
Let's keep it friendly. I mean, I agree with what you're saying.
I've hung out with
but
Phil
I
in
don't
person a
think
whole
that-
bunch, just for the record. Like, Phil's,
All right.
we're good.
Well,
Phil's
Tucson,
our
it sounds like
buddy.
you're saying once again the opposite claims. Like on the one hand, you just talked 3 minutes ago about how like mass adoption with like millions of people owning 10 million sats each is going to be like the fundamental driver.
Millions of
and that
people is not mass
Bitcoin being
adoption.
We already have millions.
Well, it sounds like you're saying opposite claims once again. It's like hard to follow your reasoning. It's like you say one thing and then the opposite about like is adoption with like many, like the distribution increasing being a source of change. And then you're saying that like it's 3 to 5% of people. I can't follow what you're trying to say.
Sure. So yeah, no, that's fair. And so what and again, my most basic point is that this tyranny ends when enough individuals accumulate enough economic power. And to connect it to the rest of it, my best guess is that 3 to 5% is probably a pretty optimistic number. Historically, it's been way less than that.
By the way, why is it tyranny? I think that you have another contradiction. On the one hand, you think, as you just stated moments ago, you think like the vast majority of people are dimwits. Right? You didn't use that
definitely.
word, but that's what you said.
Definitely.
Isn't it? And then, okay, definitely. I don't think that, but that's what you
fine.
think. And then you also think that we live in a tyrannical state. I think that if you think almost everyone is like stupid, then I think the concept of tyranny is sort of weakened. I think you can only really posit that there is tyranny if you have like respect for like fellow human beings, by and large.
Well, that's a natural law question. So that's a fundamental assumption about how a person views the world. I personally take virtually, basically almost 100% pure view of natural law, which is that, my rights and my, what's moral, what's ethical. If I'm the only one person in the entire world that thinks that's not a relevant data point for figuring it out. Like there is, I definitely take the view that there is one objective reality that we all are a part of, and so, can that, if the majority is, a bunch of dimwits or whatever, and again, I don't have an issue with them, but I just don't see any evidence that they're capable or willing of critically evaluating the world around them and interacting with it, and so. I forgot where exactly I was going with that, but it's like basically that's a natural law question of, can I don't know, can they, so if the majority, the majority supports whatever, shutting down Bitcoin, whatever, like to me, it's like, I guess, I don't know, I'm kind of rambling, but I think another key point is that if these people have influence over me in my life, I'm not using Bitcoin properly, is I think one key takeaway. So if I'm, the example of whoever's running against, Brad Sherman, if I'm concerned about who wins that race, I'm not using Bitcoin properly. I'm not using all the tools that are available to me. And that I think is a key distinction. But I think another like really, really fundamental disagreement we have is does involvement in politics provide short-term positive effects for Bitcoiners? My answer to that is no. I don't see evidence for that. You guys clearly do, which again is totally fine.
Yeah, I got to start wrapping up the stream because we've been going for like 3 hours and 15 minutes.
But banger. Yeah. Thank you guys.
I want to thank everybody for joining us in the spaces. We'll be here same time next Monday night.
Yes.
Starting at 5:30 Arizona time, which I guess we're on Pacific time currently, or Mountain Standard Time.
So if anybody feels like anything we missed or didn't address properly, come in next week.
I really appreciated the conversation. Sorry if I got a little heated.
Not at all.
I'm just trying to make sure I understood everything that was going through my ear holes.
And I said it earlier, but I appreciate you guys.
Productive.
Yeah. No, like I said, I said earlier, but I appreciate you guys, and we'll have some steak in October. It'll be good.
I have one last comment. I'm trying to figure out, and I guess this won't necessarily have to be a discussion, but how does Bitcoin stop at 3% adoption? Like, it's either got to go to 0 or it's going to go to 100% because of not because of the privacy and the power dynamics, but the economics. It has to go. It's a black hole. It's going to suck everybody into it, whether they like it or not, eventually. So, like, that's something that I will contend with, and I don't understand how it could stop and equilibrate at a small percentage of the population.
My short answer to that would be that I think the way the mass, I think the way that the masses will benefit from Bitcoin is by the world changing underneath them. I mean, I think historically you have a massive majority of the population, call it 80%, 90%, 70%, whatever number you want to use, but you have a very strong majority of the population that just goes along with whatever the prevailing narrative is, and doesn't critically evaluate the world around them, doesn't really like engage with these things, just kind of goes through it, which again is totally fine. Like, I have nothing but positive, like I want these people to be as prosperous as possible, but I think it's important to to make that observation. So how do they benefit from? I don't think they, I hope they own Bitcoin. I hope as many of them as possible own Bitcoin, but I don't think it's realistic. I don't think they ever own Bitcoin. I think they benefit from Bitcoin by the world fundamentally changing under them and the state slowly evaporating back to hell where it belongs.
Yeah. Well, thanks for everybody dropping in. Got a couple things before we close.
No, but Alejandro just got here, man.
Well, you should have gotten here. We're here next week.
Yeah, next week, 5:30.
Yeah,
Arizona time.
I'm getting my phone blown up. My girlfriend wants me to end.
Good to go.
But yeah, Bitcoin Day was a blast. There was some shit coining, but ultimately, Bitcoiners had a strong message there. It's pretty cool. There's another one coming up in Kansas City in November. If anybody's interested, we have an event tomorrow in Phoenix for the Arizona Bitcoin Network. Brian Harrington will be coming out to Phoenix on Halloween for a Bitcoin event, and that's going to be pretty dope. Love that guy. Let's see. Do I have anything else?
Yeah. Come up to, if you're at all close to Phoenix, Fate Brewing in Scottsdale tomorrow evening.
And we have a Sierra Vista meetup that's supposed to happen I think the last Saturday of the month, but we haven't put it on the schedule. I gotta get with those guys and see what they have in the plans. We're thinking about either going shooting or getting lung cancer. So
yeah. Either cigars or shooting.
Either one's cool.
Should be fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you everybody that showed up.
And shout out to all the people in the chat.
Yeah.
And yeah, you guys on Spaces were awesome too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Talk to you later.
Y'all have a good night.